A girl set out from her home to visit a friend but never arrived. Initially, the police found no clues, and the case went cold. For years, it seemed that the answer was just out of reach, and no one could solve the mystery. Decades later, everything changed when the truth emerged in an unexpected way. Claire Tiltman was born on January 14, 1977, in the small British village of Greenhithe. As an only child, she attended an all-girls school where she made many friends. From a young age, Claire was focused and determined. She aspired to be one of the first female firefighters in the country. During high school, she volunteered at charity events organized by the local fire department, offering her assistance in any way possible. However, she was also committed to earning a college degree before pursuing her dream career. In January 1993, when Claire was 16 years old, she was busy with her final exams and considering her future education. On January 18th, just 4 days after her birthday, she went to a friend's house to discuss college options and potential applications. Claire left home around 6 p.m., informing her mom that she would return in about an hour and a half. However, when that time passed, Claire still had not come back. Initially, Claire's mom suspected that she had simply lost track of time and might have stayed longer at her friend's house. However, when it was past 8 p.m., her concern grew. She called Claire's friend's house, only to learn that Claire had never arrived. Believing that plans might have changed, she began calling some of Claire's other friends, but nobody had seen her that evening. A few minutes later, Claire's mom went outside and encountered a neighbor who informed her about an incident a few miles away. The area had ambulances and numerous police cars. Feeling anxious at the time, Claire's mom went directly to the local police station to report her daughter missing. She gave them a detailed description of Claire, but instead of taking her report, the officers asked her to return home. They mentioned that there had been an incident and that someone would come by shortly to explain the situation. A short time later, police arrived at her door with devastating news that no parent ever wants to hear. Her daughter had been found dead just hours earlier. That evening, 2 men were driving along a road connecting nearby towns when they noticed a girl kneeling by the roadside. Concerned, they stopped to check on her. As they got closer, they realized something was seriously wrong. She was struggling to breathe and appeared to be unresponsive. One man quickly ran to a nearby pub to call for help while the other stayed with her. Initially, he thought she might have been hit by a car since she was so close to the road. He tried to comfort her, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. Within minutes, she stopped breathing entirely, and when paramedics arrived, it was already too late. Her body was taken to the medical examiner, and the findings were shocking. She had been stabbed 9 times, likely with a large knife, but there were no signs of abuse. Meanwhile, the police started investigating the crime scene and quickly identified where the attack had occurred. Claire was probably ambushed in a narrow alleyway off the main road leading to her friend's house. The nature of her injuries suggested that the attacker approached her from behind. However, there was little else to help the investigation. The alley was quiet, dark, and deserted. There were no security cameras, witnesses, or helpful evidence. One crucial detail stood out. The medical examiner noted the murder weapon was unusually large, too big to be carried casually in a pocket. Detectives suspected that the killer had brought the knife from home, indicating a premeditated plan to use it. News of the murder quickly spread through Claire's village and neighboring towns. That evening, some students were still at school studying for exams when they heard the news on the radio. Initially, the victim's identity was unknown, but it wasn't long before rumors circulated. With no strong leads in the investigation, the police sought help from the public. A few people came forward claiming to have seen a man in a light-colored coat near the road around 7 p.m. Another witness reported seeing a man with dark, curly hair leaving an alleyway, but neither individual could be identified, despite the tight-knit nature of the community. Detectives suspected that the attacker might have had a personal connection to Claire, which could explain the motive. However, they also considered a more alarming possibility that this incident could be part of a pattern, indicating that they might be dealing with a serial offender. In December 1988, 4 years before Claire was murdered, a 27-year-old woman was attacked by an unknown assailant while walking home from work. He was armed with a gun and a knife, abducted her, and drove to a remote area where he attempted to assault her. After stabbing her 5 times, he left her, believing she was dead. Miraculously, she survived. Despite her severe injuries and the freezing temperatures, she crawled to a nearby road, where a group of workers found her. She spent 9 days in intensive care, and doctors successfully saved her life. However, the police were never able to identify or capture her attacker. After Claire was murdered, detectives and local residents started to suspect that the same individual might be responsible for both crimes. A few days later, Claire's funeral took place, drawing hundreds of people from the community. Prior to the funeral, her parents spoke to reporters and mentioned that they feared the killer might attend the service. The detectives shared this concern, so they were present at the funeral and carefully noted everyone who attended. However, this effort still did not lead them to the person responsible for her murder. In the weeks that followed, the police continued to question local residents and investigate leads, but they did not find any useful information. Over 2 years passed, and it began to feel like the case would remain unsolved. Gradually, as people stopped discussing what happened to Claire, until one day, everything changed. On October 17, 1995, a local woman was returning home from work when a man attacked her just a few hundred yards from where Claire had been stabbed. The attacker used a knife. When the woman fell and screamed, he fled the scene. Fortunately, she survived despite her injuries. However, detectives faced challenges since the attacker approached her from behind, so she couldn't describe his face or any specific features. Luckily, a witness stepped forward and reported seeing a white Ford Capri nearby. This information allowed investigators to quickly identify the car's owner, a local milkman named Colin. Police remembered that they had previously spoken to Colin right after Claire's murder. He had called them to report seeing a man with dark hair near the crime scene. However, when detectives met with him a few weeks later, his story had changed slightly. Initially, Colin said he was driving on that road around 6:30 p.m., but now he insisted it was closer to 5:30 p.m. Nevertheless, he had an alibi. His mother told the police that they had been driving together and were already home when Claire was attacked. Detectives had more reasons to be suspicious of Colin. He drove a white Ford Capri, which witnesses had also spotted near another attack. Colin was known for wearing a light-colored trench coat, matching the description given by several witnesses from both crime scenes. He also had light-colored hair, and 2 different people reported seeing a fair-haired man near the alley where Claire was murdered. These factors led detectives to seriously consider him as a suspect and to obtain a warrant to search his home. Police discovered a large knife in the house that matched the wounds of the latest victim. However, that was just the start of their findings. They also found a hidden journal, which contained shocking revelations. In the diary, Colin confessed to attacking a woman in 1988, referring to it as his masterpiece, and claiming it had a 95% success rate. When he learned that the victim had survived, he expressed a desire to do better next time. Additionally, he mentioned an attempt to sneak into a care home to kill someone, but stated that the plan failed. Colin Ash-Smith shared some unsettling experiences from his past. He revealed that he admitted to threatening his first victim, warning her that if she reported him to the police, he would harm someone else. Additionally, Colin confessed to a stabbing incident in 1995. He was angry with his girlfriend, believing she was unfaithful. In his rage, he drove around looking for someone to hurt. Initially, he saw a man but thought that would be too risky. Later, he noticed a woman walking alone, stopped his car and attacked her. Afterward, he felt a sense of relief and was indifferent about the woman's fate. The diary revealed his intentions to commit additional murders and mentioned that he had broken into the homes of several women he knew while they were away. When police examined Colin's car, they discovered blood-stained clothes and a torn piece of a tie, which he had used in an attempt to strangle his first victim. This evidence was sufficient to charge him with attacks on both women. Detectives also believed he was responsible for Claire's murder and began investigating for any possible connections. Colin's family was familiar with Claire's family. They both frequented the same community center, a social hub for residents. Remarkably, Claire had celebrated her birthday at that center just 4 days before her death, and Colin had been there the same night. Investigators also noted that Colin attended her funeral. However, despite these connections, there was no concrete evidence linking him to her murder. While Colin was in jail, detectives interrogated him, but he denied any involvement. He did present a theory, suggesting that the killer could be a man who used to play pool with Claire at the community center. Colin claimed that this man left town soon after the murder and that he last saw him at Claire's funeral. Police were able to locate the man, but he did not match any of the witness descriptions of someone seen near the crime scene. In contrast, Colin fit the descriptions perfectly, but the police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. Colin was ultimately charged only for the 2 attacks that occurred in 1988 and 1995. In December 1996, he pleaded guilty and received life sentences, with the chance of parole after 15 years. However, investigators continued their pursuit of justice for Claire, seeking any evidence that could strengthen their case against him. Among all the possible suspects, Colin remained the most likely, but there were significant challenges: a lack of physical evidence and his alibi. Colin called the police the day after the murder, claiming he saw a man with dark hair near the scene about an hour later. However, this call contradicted his own alibi because, according to his account, he would have had to be very close to the alley when Claire was attacked. This raised suspicions among detectives. Was his mother lying to protect him? Detectives continued their investigation and eventually revealed the truth. Colin's alibi was entirely fabricated. They found concrete evidence showing that his mother was not with him that evening, indicating that she had lied to protect him. In addition to this, investigators made another unsettling discovery. They learned that Colin's father had disposed of a knife that Colin had brought home after the 1995 attack. He confessed to boiling the knife, taking it apart, and throwing away the pieces just hours before police arrived with a search warrant. As a result, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. Colin's mother was also involved. She later gave an interview to a local TV station where she claimed it was her idea for her husband to dispose of the knife. She insisted that she believed her son was innocent and was afraid that the police would wrongfully accuse him of someone else's crime. Despite their extensive investigation, police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge Colin with Claire's murder. While he served time for other attacks, detectives continued to explore his background in hopes of finding a connection to the crime, but they came up empty-handed. The only notable find occurred during a routine search of his prison cell, where officers discovered disturbing notes filled with graphic fantasies about women he knew. These notes resembled pages from his old diary and painted a troubling picture of his mindset. After that, the investigation stalled. Claire's parents believed Colin was the murderer, and it weighed heavily on them that the police couldn't charge him. Sadly, Claire's mother died of cancer in 2008, and her father passed away in 2012, so neither lived to see justice for their daughter. In 2013, the case gained public attention again as detectives renewed their efforts to identify the killer. They reached out to the public for any information, and even the Prime Minister supported their appeal. Although many tips came in, none were helpful until a former cellmate of Colin's, Stephen Dubois, stepped forward with new information. He claimed that Colin had bragged about attacking a girl one day. According to him, Colin recounted seeing her at a crosswalk and described how he suddenly lost control. Detectives quickly noticed an important detail. Claire had been using a crosswalk that led directly into the alley where she was attacked. In contrast, the other 2 victims had been found far from any crosswalks. This clue strongly indicated that Colin might have been referring to Claire or possibly another victim that the police had not yet identified. However, detectives were skeptical about the existence of other victims since there were no similar unsolved cases reported in the area. Detectives did not have enough evidence to prove guilt yet, but they decided it was time to present all their findings and attempt to take the case to trial. Meanwhile, a new law in the UK was enacted, allowing prosecutors to introduce a suspect's previous convictions in court. This could significantly impact Claire's case. Colin was already serving a sentence for 2 violent attacks that were strikingly similar to Claire's case and occurred only a short distance from where she was killed. Additionally, investigators had testimony from Stefan and solid evidence that Colin's alibi was fabricated. With this information, prosecutors felt they had enough to proceed. On February 12, 2014, detectives announced that Colin had officially been charged with Claire's murder. This was significant timing, as it coincided with his first scheduled parole hearing. Instead of being released, he remained in jail while prosecutors prepared for trial. During the proceedings, he revealed even more unsettling information. He disclosed that he began sneaking out of his house at night when he was about 19 or 20 years old, taking a knife with him and roaming the streets, looking for someone to kill. Colin expressed that for him, it was about feeling powerful and having control over others. As he didn't want to appear weak, his ex-girlfriend testified that Colin started behaving unusually right after Claire was murdered. Initially, she thought he was just as shaken as everyone else in town, but later realized there was more going on. When asked about his feelings toward women, Colin admitted he both loved and hated them. He acknowledged that he struggled with low self-esteem and often felt worthless, which made it difficult for him to trust anyone, especially women. He also mentioned that he owned a collection of 20 to 30 knives at home, along with a crossbow and several air rifles, and his parents were aware of his collection. Additionally, Colin confessed that he never left the house without carrying a knife. When Stefan was called to testify, the prosecution faced an unexpected problem. Stefan stated that he could not clearly remember what Colin had said to him and acknowledged that he might have mixed up the conversation with someone else. The trial lasted 5 weeks, and on December 11, 2014, the jury found Colin guilty of murdering Claire Tiltman. He received a life sentence in prison, with the chance for parole after 21 years. When the verdict was announced, Colin showed no emotion. He later appealed the decision, but the court turned it down, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. After 26 long years, justice was finally served. Following his conviction, detectives branded Ash-Smith absolutely evil and said he should never be released. Jaswant Narwal, chief prosecutor for CPS Southeast, called the case one of the most complex that CPS Southeast has dealt with in recent years. In November 2015, Ash-Smith appealed against his conviction on the grounds that Judge Sweeney was wrong to allow seriously harmful material to be put before the jury. However, the appeal was dismissed by Judge Davis and 2 other judges of appeal. He is currently being held at HMP Durham. In honor of Claire, local officials first named a road after her, and later they renamed a street using her last name. In 2022, a new community center was opened, proudly named after Claire Tiltman. Claire Tiltman's tragic murder left an indelible mark on Greenhithe, but her legacy endures through the community's unwavering pursuit of justice and the tributes that honor her vibrant spirit. After 26 years, Colin Ash-Smith's conviction brought closure to a case that once seemed unsolvable, underscoring the resilience of Kent police and the impact of new legal measures. While Claire's parents did not live to see this resolution, her memory lives on in the road, street, and community center named after her, inspiring future generations to embody her determination and kindness. The case stands as a testament to the power of perseverance, ensuring that Claire's light continues to shine brightly in the hearts of those who knew her and beyond.
The drive to achieve one's goals at any cost can lead people to commit shocking acts and betrayals. It can be hard to grasp the lengths someone will go to achieve their dreams, especially when it endangers the lives of others. Today's story is about a tragic murder that shocked all of Brazil. The impact was felt most deeply in the small town of São João Batista. For this close-knit community, the crime is one of the most brutal and unprecedented events in history. Flavia Godinho Mafra was born on April 19, 1996, in São João Batista, a peaceful town in the southern Brazilian state of Santa Catarina, grew up in Canalinha. As the youngest child in a large, loving family, her parents worked hard to support their children. Flavia was kind, friendly, and outgoing. She excelled in her studies and had a passion for music, always surrounded by friends. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a teacher and had no plans to leave her hometown. After attending a local teacher training college, she graduated and began teaching at the elementary school she had once attended. At 20, Flavia met Valdeli Mafra. They quickly fell in love and started dating. In the summer of 2019, Valdeli proposed, and Flavia happily accepted. They got married that October, and just 2 months later, they received wonderful news: they were going to have a baby. Their joy was beyond words. In another development, Rosalba Maria Grime was born in 1994 in Canalinia, a town in Santa Catarina. There is little information available about her early life or family background. From a young age, she was seen as unusual. People often felt she exaggerated stories, fabricated achievements, and sought to appear more important, making it hard for them to take her seriously. As she grew older, Rosalba increasingly craved attention by playing on others' sympathy. She would create tales of personal struggles and serious health issues she claimed to be facing. In one troubling incident, she tried to prevent a boyfriend from leaving by telling him she had a terminal illness, begging for his companionship during what she described as her final months. When her deception continued for a long time, she suddenly claimed to have made a miraculous recovery. In 2017, Rosalba married Zulmir Schiestel, a quiet, shy man who was easygoing and agreeable. Rosalba had taken the initiative to propose the marriage, and Zulmir simply nodded in agreement. They moved into a small home in a peaceful residential area on the outskirts of town. Rosalba worked as a librarian at a local school. However, her co-workers had mixed feelings about her, primarily because of her dominant demeanor and reputation for being dishonest. For the first 3 years of their marriage, Rosalba struggled to conceive, with doctors suggesting that she might never be able to have children. Therefore, when she discovered in the fall of 2019 that she was pregnant, she was filled with joy. She quickly shared the exciting news with her family, friends, and co-workers. Overcome with happiness, Rosalba even posted a picture of her positive pregnancy test on social media, announcing it to everyone she knew. In the weeks that followed, she was inundated with congratulations for her and the baby. Her husband and family treated her like a queen, shielding her from stress, taking care of everything for her. Even co-workers who had not been particularly friendly with her before began to show kindness, recognizing how long she had hoped to be a mother. In December of that year, Rosalba faced a heartbreaking event. She suffered a miscarriage in her 3rd month of pregnancy, leaving her deeply shocked and silent about her loss. Instead of sharing her pain, she chose to act as if she were still pregnant. She seemed determined to maintain the facade, perhaps knowing she might not have another chance to conceive. To support her ruse, she started wearing loose clothing and eating more to create the appearance of being pregnant. Meanwhile, a troubling plan began to emerge in her mind. About 2 months after she lost the baby, news spread at the school about the pregnancy of a young teacher named Flavia, who received many congratulations. Until that point, Rosalba and Flavia were not close. They had rarely interacted. However, Rosalba shared several fabricated stories in order to gain sympathy. She added Flavia on social media and began messaging her every day, suggesting they go for walks or chat since their due dates were similar. Rosalba asserted that they would have much in common. Flavia was initially hesitant to have lunch with Rosalba because of her eccentric reputation, but she eventually agreed during a work break. They exchanged phone numbers, and Rosalba shared several fabricated stories to gain sympathy. The only true part of her stories was that she had struggled for years to conceive and had longed for this pregnancy. Of course, she did not mention the miscarriage. Initially, they met infrequently, despite seeing each other at work almost every day. It later emerged that Rosalba had also connected with 2 other expectant mothers from the same town on social media, who she believed were at a similar stage in their pregnancies. She attempted to build friendships with them by inviting them out and asking to visit their homes. Rosalba claimed she was having a daughter. However, when she discovered that both women she had met online were having boys, she abruptly cut off contact with them. Shortly after, she found out that Flavia was expecting a girl, and from that point on, Rosalba became completely fixated on her. As time went on, it became harder for Rosalba to keep up the pretense of being pregnant. She frequently searched online for symptoms and experiences that expectant mothers often report. She would share these with her husband, family, and co-workers as if they were her own. Over several months, she gained nearly 30 pounds, but her appearance still didn't fully resemble that of someone in the later stages of pregnancy. Her husband insisted on joining her for doctor's appointments. He wanted to see the baby on the ultrasound, but Rosalba had to come up with excuses to maintain the deception. Zomir was a trusting man who loved his wife and believed everything she said, which made it easier for her to keep him unaware of the truth. She would tell him that appointments had been cancelled or rescheduled due to the clinic being overbooked or the doctor being unavailable. At times, she claimed she was lucky enough to get a last-minute appointment while he was at work, and he believed her every time. To strengthen her story, Rosalba began creating fake notes on her phone that appeared to be from her doctor, including recommendations, appointment confirmations, and cancellations. Although she didn't have a strong grasp of medical terminology, often made spelling and factual errors, Zomir wasn't familiar with medical details, so he had no reason to question her. To maintain the deception and avoid raising suspicion, Rosalba even sent messages to her husband pretending to be the doctor. In one message, she suggested that they temporarily pause their intimate relationship to minimize any risks to the pregnancy. He accepted this advice, believing it was from a medical expert. Rosalba developed an obsession with shopping for baby items such as onesies, diapers, bottles, pacifiers, blankets, and toys. She frequently visited stores with her husband, mother, or sister, but eventually, all her attention turned to Flavia. In July 2020, Rosalba organized an emotional maternity photo shoot. In the photos, she wore a flowing pregnancy gown and held tiny baby booties and a onesie while her husband lovingly embraced and kissed her belly, while she smiled sweetly for the camera. Everything appeared so genuine that no one suspected anything amiss. Those photos would later become part of the criminal case files. By early June 2020, Flavia and Rosalba were almost inseparable, spending time together every day, sharing thoughts, and planning for the future. However, it was always Rosalba who took the initiative. Flavia, being kind and empathetic, found it hard to say no. Whenever she tried to reschedule, Rosalba would play on Flavia's sympathy, claiming she was going through personal issues, needed someone to talk to, which worked every time. Rosalba was closely watching Flavia, asking her about her symptoms, doctor visits, and medical tests. She would then share those details with her own family and husband as if they were her own experiences. Rosalba imitated Flavia's walk, mannerisms, food cravings, and even how she held her back or moved awkwardly. Valdelli disapproved of his wife's new friendship and was upset about the time they spent together, which created tension in their marriage. They argued about it several times, but Flavia, being gentle and compassionate, couldn't bring herself to reject or ignore Rosalba. By mid-July, Rosalba had told people that she was due to deliver her baby, but she concocted another lie, claiming that the doctors had incorrectly calculated her due date. Meanwhile, she was secretly planning something disturbing, a scenario so dreadful. In August, Rosalba started planning a surprise celebration for Flavia to honor Flavia's upcoming baby. She chose decorations, invited guests, and set up a special photo area. Flavia, wanting to be polite, initially tried to decline the party. However, Rosalba became emotional, claiming she had put in a lot of effort and truly wanted to give Flavia a meaningful experience. Eventually, Flavia reluctantly agreed, unaware of the twists ahead. The celebration was scheduled for August 27, 2020. Rosalba managed all the details, promised to send the location and final arrangements to the guests. However, the day before the event, Rosalba contacted each guest and claimed the celebration had to be postponed due to unexpected issues. She assured them she would provide a new date and time soon. Her explanation was convincing, and no one questioned it, nor did anyone reach out to Flavia, who remained completely in the dark. On August 27th, at the originally planned time, Rosalba picked up Flavia, telling her they were going to the baby shower. Because it was meant to be a women-only event, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, stayed home. He walked his heavily pregnant wife to Rosalba's car, completely unaware this would be the last time he saw her. As they drove, Flavia was oblivious to their destination. Rosalba said it was a surprise, and a few minutes into the drive, she suggested Flavia wear a blindfold to keep it a secret. Flavia hesitated but eventually agreed, not sensing any danger. During the drive, Rosalba kept the conversation light to help Flavia feel relaxed and avoid raising any suspicions. They went to an abandoned ceramics warehouse in Canalinha's Galera neighborhood. After helping Flavia out of the car while she was still blindfolded, Rosalba guided her into one of the old buildings. The silence and strange smell likely made Flavia uneasy. When she reached up to take off the blindfold, Rosalba suddenly struck her head with a heavy brick. Rosalba hit she multiple times until she collapsed on the floor. In a final act of violence, Rosalba punched her in the face. It seemed Rosalba had wanted to hurt her as much as possible, despite once calling her a friend. Without checking if Flavia was still alive, Rosalba hurried to carry out the next phase of her horrific plan. She had brought a box cutter, some rags, and a blanket to the scene. With a steady hand, she began to cut into her friend, Flavia. Rosalba had no medical training, no understanding of anatomy, and no idea how a C-section was performed. Despite this, she started slicing into Flavia's abdomen with the box cutter, trying to retrieve the baby. She acted aggressively, using too much force and lacking precision. The box cutter, unlike a surgical instrument, tore through the skin rather than creating clean cuts. Rosalba had completely misunderstood the reality of what she was attempting. What she thought would be a quick procedure turned out to be chaotic and messy. The process took much longer than she expected, and her frustration grew, resulting in her accidentally cutting the baby several times while trying to pull her out. The environment was entirely unsanitary. Rosalba didn't even attempt to clean the tools she had brought. The fact that the baby survived the ordeal was nearly miraculous. After finally extracting the baby, she wrapped the newborn in the blanket and placed her in the back seat of her car. Rosalba then wiped her hands as best as she could, changed into clean clothes she had brought from home, and threw her blood-stained outfit into the trunk. She paused to rehearse her story before heading to the hospital. In her haste, Rosalba forgot to properly close the trunk of her car, and while waiting at a red light, it popped open enough to expose the bloodied clothing inside. Passengers in the car behind her noticed this and immediately called the police, providing a description of the vehicle and the direction it was heading. Minutes after Rosalba arrived at the hospital, officers intercepted her at the entrance as she carried a blood-soaked bundle in her arms. She told them it was her baby and that the newborn needed urgent medical attention. Officers escorted her to the emergency room while they waited nearby. With a trembling voice and tears in her eyes, Rosalba explained to the medical staff that she had gone into sudden labor and didn't have time to reach the hospital in advance. She said the baby had fallen onto gravel during her rush trip to the car, and in a panic, she had wrapped the baby in the first blanket she found before driving. When a doctor informed her that she needed to be examined, Rosalba refused, insisting she was fine. This raised immediate concerns among the staff. Upon examining the baby, the medical team found several unusual cuts and puncture wounds that did not appear to be from a fall on gravel. The injuries looked like they had been inflicted with a sharp object in a chaotic manner. Fortunately, none of the wounds affected vital organs, and the medical team quickly treated them to prevent infection. Concerns were immediately communicated to the police, who insisted that Rosalba undergo a physical examination. They warned her that if she refused, they would have to use legal authority. With no other option, Rosalba reluctantly agreed. The examination confirmed the doctor's suspicions. There were no signs of childbirth or pregnancy. There was no bleeding, no physical trauma, and no other indicators. Both internally and externally, everything looked normal, indicating that her entire account was fabricated. However, the doctors chose not to confront Rosalba immediately. Instead, they asked her to call her husband, Zolmir, and request that he bring her personal documents since she only had her driver's license with her. They needed to investigate where the baby had come from and the source of the unusual wounds on the newborn. The condition of the baby suggested a delivery in an unsanitary setting, but the full extent of the horrifying crime had yet to be uncovered. Rosalba called Zomir, informing him that she was at the hospital and that their daughter had been born, but complications had arisen. She requested that he bring some paperwork and told him where to find it. Unfortunately, she made a major oversight. She forgot about a crucial piece of evidence. While gathering the documents, Zomir inadvertently picked up a medical record that belonged to someone else, specifically Flavia's file. She had taken the folder to review the test results and recommendations and later hidden it in her drawer with her own documents. When hospital staff noticed that the medical file belonged to a woman named Flavia Godinho, who was expecting a daughter in early September, they realized the baby seemed to be hers but was not with her. However, the pressing question remained: where was the real mother? The police immediately began to suspect Zomir could be involved. He was detained, questioned about how he had obtained someone else's medical file and where his wife had gotten the baby. Clearly confused and shaken, he claimed he had no idea what was happening. When informed that Rosalba had never been pregnant, he was visibly stunned. He then asserted that this was not true, stating he had cared for Rosalba throughout her pregnancy and even claimed to have felt the baby move. He presented photos from their maternity shoot and messages he believed were from the doctor monitoring her pregnancy. However, these messages turned out to be incriminating. They were filled with spelling errors and incorrect medical terminology. Authorities quickly discovered that the texts had come from Rosalba's own phone. After laying out all the facts, Zomir broke down in tears, covering his face with his hands. He had truly trusted his wife and was eagerly anticipating becoming a father. Meanwhile, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, had reported her missing. He informed the police that she had left with a friend to attend the baby shower, expecting to return by 9 p.m., but she never came back and her phone was off. Worried, Valdelli began calling other guests who were said to be invited to the party, only to find out in shock that the event had been cancelled the day before. As Valdelli continued to attempt to reach Rosalba, the friend who supposedly organized the gathering, his concern deepened when he discovered her phone was also turned off. Realizing he couldn't wait any longer, he went directly to the police. However, law enforcement had not yet received the hospital report regarding Rosalba and the newborn, so they were unaware that the cases might be linked. The officers said they would start searching in the morning, but that wasn't sufficient for Valdelli. He teamed up with Flavia's parents and other relatives to begin their own search. They divided into teams to cover more areas, and Valdelli decided to check the outskirts of town. It was there, while passing by an abandoned factory, that he chose to stop and investigate. Tragically, he found his wife's body, brutally disfigured. Shocked and terrified, he quickly called the police, unable to understand what had happened or who could commit such a horrific act. When the police arrived, they had already been informed by the hospital about Rosalba. This woman also possessed a medical file belonging to a woman named Flavia Godinho. The authorities realized that the name of the victim discovered at an abandoned factory matched the name on the stolen medical file, which clarified the case. Forensic evidence showed that the victim had been hit at least 5 times in the head with a brick, but these injuries were not fatal on their own. The cause of death was identified as severe blood loss due to a violent attempt to remove the baby. A box cutter used in the act was found near the body. With all the evidence pointing to Rosalba's guilt, it became a straightforward case. DNA testing confirmed that the baby Rosalba attempted to claim was indeed Flavia's daughter. Despite the strong evidence against her, Rosalba continued to deny her involvement and maintained her story. Her fingerprints were discovered on the knife beside Flavia's body. Flavia's blood was found on her clothes, shoes, and hair. Investigators confirmed that Rosalba had a miscarriage months earlier and had lied about still being pregnant. She had premeditated the crime, choosing her victim in advance to take the baby, without considering the consequences of her actions. Rosalba was convicted of aggravated homicide, infanticide, concealment of a corpse, obstruction of justice, kidnapping of a minor, and denial of rights to infants. In hopes of receiving a lighter sentence, she later recounted the events in detail, shocking everyone in the courtroom. Her attorney claimed that Rosalba had suffered a psychological breakdown after her miscarriage and became obsessed with motherhood, losing touch with reality. However, a psychological evaluation determined that she was mentally competent and fully accountable for her actions. She was sentenced to 57 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving at least half of her sentence. Zolmir, Rosalba's husband, was completely exonerated. It was established that he had no knowledge of his wife's plans and had no part in the crime. Shortly after her arrest, he filed for divorce and moved away from São João Batista. Flavia's family also chose to leave the small town after the legal proceedings were finished. The case had become the most talked about topic in the community, and they wanted to protect young Cecilia, the name they chose for Flavia's daughter. The tragic murder of Flavia Godinho Mafra stands as a chilling reminder of how far desperation and obsession can drive a person to commit unspeakable acts. The small, tight-knit community of São João Batista was forever changed by this brutal crime, which shattered their sense of safety and trust. Flavia, a beloved teacher and soon-to-be mother, was robbed of her life and dreams by someone she considered a friend, leaving her family and community to grapple with unimaginable grief. Rosalba Maria Grimes' calculated deception and heinous actions not only took a life but also exposed the depths of her fixation on fulfilling a fantasy at any cost. While justice was served with her conviction, the scars left on Flavia's loved ones and the town will endure. Cecilia, Flavia's daughter, survives as a symbol of hope amidst tragedy, raised by a family determined to honor her mother's memory. This case underscores the profound consequences of unchecked ambition and the devastating ripple effects of betrayal, serving as a somber lesson in the value of empathy, honesty, and the sanctity of human life.
On the morning of July 4, 2011, the body of a woman was found 5 miles outside of Wayland, Massachusetts. A cyclist, who was enjoying the scenery near a swampy area, noticed something unusual and decided to investigate. To her shock, she discovered the lifeless body of a young girl lying in the grass and mud. It was clear that the girl had not drowned. Instead, she had suffered a brutal fate. There was a noticeable wound on her neck, and a bungee cord was entangled in her hair. The bystander, however, still in shock, called emergency services to report what she witnessed. When law enforcement arrived, they pulled the body out of the water and examined it before sending it for forensic analysis. Since the girl had only been in the water for a short time, her appearance had not changed much. Officers identified her as 18-year-old Lauren Astley, who had been reported missing the night before. Lauren did not come home or attend a meeting with her friends. CCTV footage showed her entering the shopping center, where she worked as a sales clerk at Tiltman on July 3rd and leaving at 6:51 p.m. after her shift ended. At that time, she was on the phone with someone. Sadly, this was the last confirmed sighting of her, and she has not been heard from since. Malcolm Astley, Lauren's father, started to feel anxious because his daughter was always punctual and reliable. If she said she would be home at a specific time, she always did. She never changed her plans without a reason, and usually, she would inform him if she was going to be late. Understanding that something might have gone wrong, Malcolm quickly alerted the police about her disappearance. The police quickly began the search for Lauren. At the same time, her family and friends joined in to look for her. News of her disappearance spread rapidly through word of mouth among their acquaintances. Eventually, her car was discovered in a local beach parking lot. The windows were down, and her personal belongings, including a purse and a laptop, were left inside the car. However, Lauren was still missing, and it was uncertain where she might have gone after abandoning her vehicle in that condition. When Malcolm learned that his daughter's car had been found, he quickly drove to the location to search for her. He walked along the shoreline, using a flashlight to scan the water as if he might find her there. Soon after, Lauren's friends arrived, choosing to stay overnight at the site in hopes of being the first to see her. They spent the entire night searching the area, wondering where Lauren could have gone. It was hard for them to believe that the person they had been talking and laughing with just moments ago could simply vanish. Tragically, just 12 hours later, Lauren's body was discovered. The first person the officers contacted was her father. They shared the devastating news with him and asked him to come for identification. Malcolm struggled to accept that the girl on the pathologist's table was his daughter. However, once he composed himself, he officially recognized her. Before him lay his young and vibrant daughter, who had so much potential ahead of her. Heartbroken, he faced the painful reality and knew he had two important tasks: to inform his ex-wife about the tragedy and to find the person responsible for his daughter's death. When the devastating news reached the city, people were in disbelief. Friends and family collectively asserted that Lauren had no enemies or anyone who wished her harm. The only person that some began to suspect was her ex-boyfriend, Nathaniel Fujita. His name was mentioned cautiously, as everyone recognized his deep love for Lauren and believed he could never harm her. Nevertheless, the investigations proceeded. Lauren and Nathaniel were the envy of their entire high school. She was a petite, pretty brown girl who stood out for her energy and uniqueness, and he was a tall, ambitious soccer player adored by many girls. Although the two had known each other since childhood, they revealed their feelings later on. Their relationship began in high school and lasted 3 years. It was a colorful romance with all the typical ups and downs. They fought and made up, broke up and got back together. Both had strong personalities, but they tried to cherish the bond that existed between them. At least, this was true for the first few years of their relationship. Lauren Astley was born in 1993 in Boston. She was the only child of Mary and Malcolm, which meant that both parents focused all their attention on her. Since they both worked as teachers, they instilled important values in her from an early age, the most significant being their desire for their daughter to grow up to be a good person. When Lauren was 6 years old, her parents divorced. However, this did not affect her upbringing. Both continued to care for her and support her in all their endeavors. Lauren was a remarkable young woman, constantly engaged in various activities that kept her busy. She was passionate about tennis and soccer, sang in a musical group, and was a member of the Youth Symphony Orchestra. Additionally, she took part in her church choir, worked as a counselor at a children's camp. No school or town concert was complete without her involvement, and many were amazed by her irrepressible energy. She was active, everywhere at once. Another aspect of Lauren's hobbies was her social activism. At the age of 12, she helped the victims of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Louisiana, and returned to the area 2 more times for similar missions. With her big, kind heart, open to the world and people, she cared for others more than she cared for herself. Those around her knew they could rely on her anytime for help or advice. Nathaniel attended high school with Lauren. He was a standout player on the school soccer team and showed great potential, dreaming of a future in sports. He was known as a diligent student and the life of the party, the eldest son of Beth and Toma Fujita. His family enjoyed prosperity and some fame in certain circles. His father was a renowned guitarist and a professor at Berklee College of Music in Boston, and was known for his unconventional approach to life. Interestingly, Nathaniel and Lauren developed a romantic relationship after she interviewed Nathaniel's father for a school project. After that, she began visiting their home more often, and once they stopped hiding their feelings, their parents began to communicate, visit each other. In the beginning, the first 2 years of Nathaniel and Lauren's relationship were wonderful. They were both attractive and their bond attracted a lot of attention. They enjoyed many activities together, going out, playing sports, studying, and more. However, over time, their closeness started to become overwhelming. Nathaniel grew more controlling, refusing to let Lauren go out by herself and becoming jealous over small things. He often imagined threats that didn't exist and wanted all of her attention for himself, leading to frequent arguments. Despite these issues, Lauren never reported any physical abuse. Instead, their relationship turned into an emotional roller coaster, losing its sense of peace. This instability was uncomfortable for them both, yet they struggled to regain the happy feelings they once had. As Lauren neared the end of her schooling, she started to consider her future. She made a list of the strengths and weaknesses of her relationship with Nathaniel and realized it was time to part ways. His behavior around her had changed, and her mother had unintentionally influenced her perception of their relationship, projecting her own ideas about a future with Nathaniel onto Lauren. Additionally, the upcoming college enrollment weighed heavily on her decision. Their paths were already separating. Lauren was applying to Elon University in North Carolina, while Nathaniel had received an invitation to play soccer at Trinity College in Connecticut. On April 1st, 2011, which was also her birthday, Lauren made a significant decision. She believed it was the right time to embrace changes and begin anew, as everyone had new relationships and activities to occupy their minds and help alleviate sadness. However, Nathaniel did not feel the same way. He experienced profound feelings of loss and loneliness. His enthusiasm for college had faded. He no longer engaged in practicing or socializing. Instead, he spent his days lying on the couch watching TV. Nathaniel slipped into a deep depression that became overwhelming for him. Everyone noticed that the once active, energetic young man had become withdrawn and depressed. He turned to alcohol and marijuana to escape his reality. It was difficult for Lauren to witness this change and to feel responsible for it. She sought advice from her friends on how to help him, but they all suggested that she should not interfere and instead give him the space to heal alone. They warned that her involvement could be seen as an attempt to fix him, which might make things worse. After graduation, Ashley's kindness and eagerness to help led to unexpected trouble. She and her friends organized a large party for about 150 people, held under a vast dome where everyone danced and had a good time. Nathaniel was among the guests, but he arrived quite drunk. When he saw Lauren dancing in the center of the dance floor, he attempted to talk to her. She politely asked him to leave her alone so he wouldn't ruin the party, explaining that they had already discussed everything before and that she didn't want to engage with him in his current state. Despite her request, he insisted on starting over the conversation. As time went on, Nathaniel's mood worsened, and he grew increasingly aggressive. Eventually, in a fit of anger, he punched a pole supporting the structure, causing it to shake and collapse, which ruined the celebration. The crowd was upset, wanted Nathaniel to leave the party. Later, Lauren approached her mother, crying and revealing that her ex-boyfriend would not leave her alone and was following her everywhere. She explained that at the graduation event, he prevented anyone from dancing with her and acted very badly. He was upset that she was happy without him. When the police learned that Lauren was missing, they immediately began questioning everyone close to her. All evidence pointed to Nathaniel, as he seemed to be the only one with a motive to hurt her. However, his friends all insisted that he was innocent. The officers had encountered previous cases where crimes were committed by unexpected individuals. Nathaniel and his mother met the detectives at their front door. During the discussion, Nathaniel appeared confused and upset about the sudden disappearance of someone he cared about. He shared that he had seen her recently around 7 p.m. when she stopped to talk to him in her car. Their conversation was pleasant but short, lasting no more than 5 minutes. He claimed that he was at home when Lauren disappeared and did not leave, but his alibi was hard to confirm since he was alone. His mother supported his story, mentioning that she had also seen Nathaniel's ex-girlfriend that day when Lauren visited the mall where she worked part-time. The mother was concerned about Nathaniel's well-being, which is why she had asked Lauren to speak with him. Nathaniel's parents had already consulted a psychiatrist, but the therapy sessions were unhelpful. Their son had become completely apathetic, merely going through the motions of life. His mother hoped that Lauren's words would inspire him or at least help him regain some pride so he could move forward. This request made things more complicated for Lauren, but the meeting was supposed to be brief, and so it remained under the radar. After her meeting with Nathaniel's mother, Lauren had a phone conversation with Nathaniel, which was captured by the mall's security cameras. Concerned about her ex-boyfriend, she reached out to him and made plans to meet at 7:05 p.m. Lauren arrived at Fujita House and texted, "Here." The information Nathaniel and Beth provided was indeed valuable to the police. However, it was unclear where Lauren had gone afterward and why her car was left unlocked at the beach. The case became clearer when Lauren Ashley's body was found. The detectives decided to visit Nathaniel again. However, he was not home this time. They didn't need him there, as they had a search warrant to gather evidence to support their theory about his possible involvement in the murder. Their examination began in the garage, where the specialist quickly noticed signs of a violent incident. Bloodstains were found on the floor, and several elastic cords hanging prominently on the wall matched those tangled in the victim's hair. Additional traces of blood were found throughout the house, including faint splatters on the doorknob, kitchen floor, kitchen sink, and bathroom sink. It was clear someone had attempted to clean up the mess, but did so hastily and poorly. In the basement, detectives discovered a black gym bag containing wet and muddy tennis shoes. In Nathaniel's bedroom, they found a hidden stash with a pair of bloody shoes and wet, bloody clothes. The mud on the shoes appeared to match the mud from the swamp where Lauren's body was found, but samples would need to be sent to a lab for official analysis. Experts later confirmed the detectives' suspicions, revealing that the blood found in Fujita House belonged to Lauren Astley. They gathered compelling evidence linking Nathaniel to his ex-girlfriend's murder, but his location remained unknown, leading to him being declared a wanted person. The investigation advanced rapidly, and just a few hours later, the suspect was located. He had been staying with a cousin in a nearby town. On the morning of July 5, 2011, Nathaniel was arrested on suspicion of murder. He appeared detached and quiet during his arrest and did not resist. However, he also refused to cooperate with investigators. During questioning, he remained silent about the charges against him. The detectives speculated that either he couldn't justify his actions or he was afraid to reveal too much, which is why he chose not to speak. Investigators believe that Lauren visited her ex-boyfriend after meeting with his mother because she was worried about him and wanted to cheer him up. They later went to Fujita's garage, where a fight may have occurred. During this altercation, Nathaniel attacked Lauren and began to strangle her with a bungee cord. After killing her, he drove her car to the beach and disposed of the car keys in a storm drain, which were later recovered. Nathaniel then returned home, loaded Lauren's body into his car, and drove it to a swamp. He attempted to cover up the crime. Although Nathaniel had not been physically violent with Lauren before, he had shown moments of uncontrolled aggression. His actions seemed to be driven by an inability to accept the breakup and feelings of resentment. On August 23, 2011, Nathaniel faced a preliminary hearing where he was charged with first-degree felony assault and battery using a dangerous weapon. When asked if he would plead guilty, he quietly said no. It soon became evident that his lawyers had acted unethically and had established a questionable strategy for his defense. Consequently, the prosecutor requested that the court deny bail for the defendant, and the court approved this request. On February 13, 2013, during the trial, Nathaniel's lawyer, William Sullivan, argued that his client was not mentally competent to stand trial due to insanity. He acknowledged that a murder had occurred, but emphasized that on the evening of July 3, 2011, Nathaniel had a severe episode of clinical depression that led to a psychotic breakdown. This episode impaired his ability to understand his actions during the attack on Lauren. Nathaniel's friends supported the defense's case by describing noticeable changes in his behavior, indicating that he had stopped socializing and lost interest in activities he once loved, like soccer, which he had even practiced despite being sick. Following his breakup with Lauren, it appeared that he transformed dramatically overnight. The psychiatrist who treated Nathaniel also testified at the court hearing. He diagnosed Nathaniel and recommended medication and therapy, but Nathaniel refused both. During the trial, it was proposed that the defendant's mental health issues might have originated from his painful breakup, but were mainly caused by his multiple head injuries from sports. The breakup worsened his condition and led to a severe episode. However, the prosecution disagreed with the defense's claims. Prosecutor Lisa McGovern argued that the defendant was aware of his actions, acted deliberately, and committed the crime for selfish reasons. Nathaniel was found to have been continuously stalking Lauren, causing her distress. On that particular day, just a few hours before her work ended, he showed up at the shopping center and watched her, as confirmed by CCTV footage. Lauren's situation, which arose at his mother's request, gave Nathaniel the chance to act on his criminal intentions. Witness testimonies supported the prosecution's case, and Nathaniel showed no remorse for his actions. An eyewitness saw Nathaniel returning home on the night of the incident with music playing in his car. A cousin also provided damaging information about him. She recalled that on the evening of July 3rd, her brother had called her to hang out, but she was busy and declined. He became very upset. expressing a desire to distract himself, but it seemed that didn't help. The following day, after news of Lauren's death broke, she reached out to him to ask if he was aware of it. He responded that no one would ever find out the truth about her death or the location of the murder weapon. He also acknowledged that he had driven his ex-girlfriend's car to the town beach. Recognizing that Nathaniel was implicated in the situation, his sister urged him to confess. In 2009, after Nathaniel and Lauren break up, an interesting incident occurred. Lauren went to a disco with friends, where a guy showed interest in her. Following the breakup, she decided to give this new guy a chance. However, Nathaniel, her ex, witnessed this and violently confronted the new man, threatening to harm him if he got close to Lauren again. Nathan's jealousy was evident. When he drank alcohol, he became unpredictable and dangerous. This situation revealed Nathaniel's violent tendencies and suggested that he could be a suspect. Additionally, new disturbing details emerged. Lauren's body showed wounds that had been inflicted prior to her death, including evident defensive wounds, which suggested that she had attempted to fight back. A forensic psychiatrist brought in by the prosecution evaluated the defendant's mental state. Unlike the earlier assessment, he concluded that Nathaniel was of sound mind and capable of making rational decisions at the time of the crime. The intense conflict between the prosecution and the defense hinged on whether Nathaniel would be deemed insane. If found insane, his punishment would be significantly less severe. While this wouldn't eliminate the charges against him, it would greatly reduce his level of responsibility. The trial was emotionally charged, as family members from both sides attended. Previously friends, they were now each suffering in their own way. Nathaniel's parents were in tears throughout the trial, struggling to comprehend what had occurred and feeling overwhelming guilt for their son. The burden of his actions weighed heavily on his loved ones. Mary and Malcolm were devastated by the loss of their only daughter. Meanwhile, Lauren was enduring unimaginable pain caused by the man she loved. Experts determined that she lived for several minutes after the rope around her neck was tightened. Lauren's mother desperately sought to understand why this tragedy happened to her daughter and how long it had been in the making. On March 7, 2013, after a 3-week trial, Nathaniel Fujita was found guilty on all counts. The jury took just 1 day to reach their final decision. The 20-year-old received a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. Following the verdict, Lauren's father approached Nathaniel's parents and embraced them, showcasing his strong character and compassion. Both families had experienced a profound loss. In response, Mary and Malcolm Astley founded the Lauren Dunn Astley Memorial Fund to educate teenagers about healthy relationships. They believe that Nathaniel's crime could have been avoided. Lauren's family is now committed to raising awareness about preventing relationship violence and coping with breakups. In 2024, the State Superior Court ended mandatory life sentences without parole for offenders under 20 at the time of their crime. As a result, Nathaniel now has a chance for freedom, although no hearing has been confirmed as of June 2025. In March 2025, Nathaniel Fujita requested a retrial in the Superior Court, with prosecutors responding, but the outcome has yet to be decided. Some believe that love can easily turn to hate. Obsessive love, mixed with jealousy and selfishness, can sometimes lead to irrational actions. The tragic experiences of the Fujita and Ashley families illustrate this point. Lisa Marie McIntosh Neufel was born on May 20, 1971 in Reynoldsburg, Franklin County, Ohio, USA. She was the daughter of William Clark and Rita Bala McIntosh, who later had another daughter named Laura. Growing up in a small, loving family, Lisa was known for her kindness and willingness to share her smile with others. In elementary school, her friendly personality stood out. She quickly won the affection of her classmates and teachers. During high school, she became known for her sharp sense of humor. Therefore, it was no surprise when she chose to pursue a career in social work after graduating. In the mid-90s, Lisa began her career and met Nicholas. They discovered they shared many common interests, especially their strong family values shaped by Nicholas's upbringing. His character and maturity quickly captured Lisa's heart, and they soon got married. Their love for children made Lisa's first pregnancy an incredibly joyful moment in her life. In 1999, they welcomed their first daughter, Megan. While Nicholas worked hard at his construction business, Lisa dedicated herself to caring for Megan. Despite their busy lives, they always made time for outdoor walks, especially by the nearby lakes. Over the years, camping became a cherished family tradition that Lisa loved. The following year, Lisa chose to return to her career. She received a great opportunity to join the Department of Social Services team for children and families in Cuyahoga County. Meanwhile, the relationship between Lisa and Nicholas worsened, leading to their divorce in 2003. Despite this, they worked to maintain friendly relations for the sake of their daughter. During this period, Lisa developed a strong desire to support children without families, became a foster mother. Soon after, both children and teenagers waiting for their cases to be resolved began to stay temporarily in the home of Lisa and her daughter, Megan. At 34, Lisa felt she was fulfilling her purpose and was truly happy. In 2005, Lisa's life changed when she met Kevin Nofel. He had a son from a previous relationship. Kevin had a diverse work history, having been a medical technician and a school bus driver. At the time they met, he was a truck driver for a food company. Despite the good pay, his job left him with little time for personal relationships, so he quickly asked Lisa out on a date. Lisa was flattered by the attention from an attractive man. However, worried that the meeting might not meet her expectations, she asked her colleague to join them. To everyone's surprise, Kevin was polite and courteous. Lisa realized she had found someone special. Later, Kevin told his sister that he had met a woman he genuinely liked. After a year of dating, Lisa and Kevin got married and bought a house together. They also took out several insurance policies worth a total of $750,000 to secure their family's future. In 2009, the happy couple welcomed their first daughter. Sometimes, Lisa couldn't believe how much happiness life had brought her. Meanwhile, Lisa kept registering her home as a temporary shelter for children. In July 2011, she became the guardian of a teenager named Sabrina Zunick, whose story deeply affected Lisa. Sabrina was born on October 27, 1994 in Cleveland, and was the only daughter of her parents. Her childhood was very difficult. Her mother had a long history of serious theft convictions. Additionally, her father struggled with paranoid schizophrenia and was also well known to the local police for selling banned substance. The birth of their daughter did not lead the parents to change their way of life. Instead, they continued to face legal issues and struggled with serious addictions. To help care for Sabrina, they often asked her paternal grandmother for assistance. In February 1996, when Sabrina was just 2 years old, her father was arrested again for violence against his wife. After his release, the paternal grandmother suggested that he seek professional help for his mental health, but he declined and sank further into his problems. Meanwhile, Sabrina's mother also refused to take responsibility for taking care of her, so she stayed with her grandmother. After 2 years, Sabrina was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. She struggled to interact with her peers and faced significant behavioral challenges as a teenager. This led to frequent criticism from school officials and poor academic performance. As she continued to have difficulty fitting in, she often got into fights with other children. The situation at home was also troubling. Sabrina began stealing money from her grandmother to buy illegal substances. This prompted her grandmother to seek help from the guardianship system, explaining that she could no longer care for Sabrina due to her health issues. As a result, at the age of 14, Sabrina was placed into state care and moved to a shelter on the outskirts of the city. In the following years, Sabrina experienced a series of temporary housing situations, all while longing for stability and a real family. During this time, she was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, and depression. When she got the chance to live with Nofel family, she felt it was a sign of hope. Upon arriving at their home, her hopes were realized. She was warmly welcomed as a family member. Sabrina received her own room and was surrounded by care, quickly becoming comfortable playing with Megan and looking after little Haley. After living with the family for 5 months, Sabrina started to improve her school performance, something she hadn't done before. However, she began to feel jealous of Megan and Haley, suspecting that her adoptive parents favored them. This jealousy often resulted in arguments with Lisa. Kevin, despite being away from home frequently, made an effort to resolve the tension when he returned. and Sabrina sought his support during these times. Aware of Sabrina's challenging background, Knofels chose to take steps to help her feel more valued and included in the family. The situation quickly became troubling and unexpected. Unknown to others, Kevin and Sabrina's relationship was more than just that of a stepfather and stepdaughter. By spring 2012, they had entered into a secret affair. While traveling, Kevin would pay Sabrina to send him explicit photos. Whenever they had the chance, they would meet privately, making fun of Lisa's belief in her husband's good intentions toward his adopted daughter. Over time, Lisa becomes increasingly aware of the strangeness, asking her husband to pay less attention to their adopted daughter, which causes conflict between them. The arguments became so intense that Lisa considered getting a divorce. Meanwhile, Kevin, not wanting to lose Sabrina, reached out to her social worker to ask if he could keep custody of her if they divorced. In the morning, Kevin started waking up early to take Sabrina to school. During these rides, he discussed the impending divorce with Lisa and envisioned a future where they could all live together happily. This dream motivated Sabrina. At one point, Kevin told Sabrina that, due to insurance policies, Lisa would be worth more to them dead than alive, and that the money could give them a comfortable life. From then on, Kevin started to manipulate Sabrina, instructing her on how to stage a robbery and how to use a knife to kill. To ease her fears about being caught, he reassured her that serious consequences were unlikely. He also told her to act as if she couldn't remember anything about what had happened. Kevin promised that the money they would receive would allow them to buy a house where Sabrina could take care of little Haley as if she were her own daughter. Sabrina completely accepted the plan. Sabrina needed help from someone in the criminal underworld, so she brought up the situation with a close friend from school. While they were in Kevin's car, they discussed how to find someone to eliminate Lisa. The friend, shocked by what she was hearing, tried to distance herself from the situation. Despite this failure, Sabrina is determined to carry out her plan. At that time, she was focused on her future and was discussing with her teachers the possibility of going to cosmetology school or becoming a model after graduating high school. On October 27, 2012, when Sabrina turned 18, she understood that she had to leave the foster care system and separate from Kevin. Determined to continue her stay, she filed a petition with the court, which surprisingly approved her request. On November 15, while Kevin was driving her to school, he pulled over, in tears, and confessed that he was contemplating in his own life due to a recent argument with Lisa. This moment was crucial for Sabrina, and she assured Kevin that she would help him. He then instructed her to wear a mask to disguise her face and make it appear as though a robbery was taking place. A few hours later, Kevin left Sabrina at home when he went to work. That night, Megan went to her room, while Lisa and little Haley slept in the master bedroom. Meanwhile, Kevin and Sabrina were texting each other. After midnight, Sabrina got up from her room, went to the kitchen, and took a sharp knife. Quietly, she entered the bedroom and hid Haley in the closet. When Lisa woke up, she was disoriented in the dark and thought it was Megan. Before she could say anything, Sabrina attacked her. Lisa screamed. Megan, hearing the screams, rushed into the bedroom to find a terrifying scene. Trembling, she called 911. Megan's panic and confusion grew with each moment as Sabrina, undeterred, continued her attack. Seconds later, Lisa died. When paramedics arrived, they found Megan crying and devastated over her mother's death. Fortunately, they rescued little Haley from the closet, where she had been hiding in fear. Officers then approached Sabrina, who had multiple cuts on her arms and appeared to be in shock. She was quickly arrested and taken to the hospital. Upon hearing about the incident, Kevin to go back home. During a casual interview, agents observed that he remained surprisingly calm despite the seriousness of the situation. In fact, he seemed more focused on the details of the attack than on its tragic outcome. 10 hours after the incident, Sabrina was moved from the hospital to the police station for questioning. Once there, the detectives read her rights and told her she was considered a suspect in the murder. Sabrina explained that she had gone into Lisa's bedroom to get a headache pill, but then felt a mental block. The detective asked her several questions about what happened next. Sabrina carefully followed the instructions Kevin had given her, saying her memory was unclear. Even when the detective pressed her, she remained consistent with Kevin's plan. The detective decided to change his approach and started asking Sabrina about her relationship with Lisa. Sabrina insisted that she had no knowledge of what happened to the victim. Realizing that sharing information was not effective, the detectives shifted their focus to exploring potential motives for the suspect. As a result, Sabrina was placed under preliminary arrest at the Lake County Jail. The Lake County Medical Examiner's report revealed shocking details. According to court records, Lisa was stabbed 178 times with a 15-inch knife. Many of the wounds were self-defense. The attack was so violent, the knife bent. Many defensive wounds showed that Lisa fought hard to protect herself from the attacker. The knife used in the assault had bent due to the strength of the blows. On Saturday, November 17, 2012, family and friends gathered to support Kevin and his daughter Megan. They observed that Kevin was behaving unusually and seemed distant. His strange behavior stemmed from panic. He was worried that Sabrina might report him or that something had gone awry. A few hours later, Kevin attempted to visit Sabrina in prison, but the authorities denied him access. This denial angered him and raised concerns among the detectives investigating the situation. After his wife's funeral, Kevin started reaching out to insurance companies to collect payments on his policies. He used the money to pay off his mortgage, buy new cars, and invest in real estate in Florida. At that time, he felt confident that no one would discover his secrets and firmly believed in Sabrina's loyalty. In May 2013, feeling betrayed, Sabrina chose to cooperate with the investigation and testify against Kevin. In her testimony, which she provided in exchange for a lighter sentence, she shared all the details of their relationship, including how Kevin convinced her to commit the crime and his intentions behind it. She also talked about the original plan to hire someone else to carry out the murder. The detective asked her to leave a message for Kevin regarding an important discussion. On June 4, 2013, Kevin called Sabrina again. Not realizing that authorities were recording their conversation, Sabrina expressed her worries about the police discovering her past, and Kevin reassured her while being careful not to share specific details that could incriminate him. The detective tried to replicate the operation, but it didn't work out. In their quest for more evidence, investigators obtained court approval to examine the phone records of Sabrina and Kevin. Their analysis uncovered over 100 messages exchanged between November 1 and November 15, including 78 messages sent in the half hour leading up to Lisa's death. These messages, which had not been revealed before, provided evidence indicating Kevin's guilt. Consequently, on August 9, 2013, he was arrested, despite maintaining his innocence. He faced 6 charges of abuse, 3 charges of being an accessory to murder with aggravating circumstances, and 2 charges of conspiracy to commit murder with aggravating circumstances. The trial began on May 29, 2014, in Lake County Common Pleas Court. In his opening statement, the prosecutor presented evidence suggesting that Kevin had heavily influenced Sabrina to commit the crime, highlighting the inappropriate nature of their relationship. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Sabrina's mental health issues showed she acted independently. However, this argument weakened when Sabrina stated her love for Kevin during questioning and confirmed that both of them planned the crime together in order to be together. The defense attorney highlighted the absence of physical evidence against his client and the lack of proof regarding their supposed relationship. In response, Sabrina reluctantly agreed, her sadness evident as Kevin's lawyer presented his case. However, she remained firm in her account of what happened, stressing that she was not the only one involved. On June 11, 2014, after 9 hours of discussion, the Lake County jury found Kevin guilty of all 11 charges. The next hearing was held nearly 2 months later, on August 6, 2014. Before the judge made his ruling, the prosecutor spoke to the audience, stating that Kevin never genuinely intended to create a happy life with Sabrina. Instead, he used her as a tool to gain money from his wife's insurance and to acquire their shared property. Before the sentencing, the judge explained Kevin's involvement in the crime. Consequently, Kevin was sentenced to life in prison, with the option for parole after 30 years for the murder of Lisa. On September 29, 2014, the judge presided over a hearing where Sabrina Zunick was convicted of murder. Before handing down the sentence, the judge acknowledged that Sabrina had been manipulated by Kevin. However, He stressed that the severity of the crime was more significant than this factor. Expressing remorse, Sabrina apologized to the victims and stated her desire to begin healing. Like Kevin, she was also sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. In February 2017, a judge decided that Megan and Haley, who witnessed a terrible event, should each receive $6.2 million in compensation for their personal and property losses. This tragedy deeply affected the victim's eldest daughter. However, despite the trauma that could have influenced her future, she chose to pursue a degree in criminal justice. She wanted to honor her mother's legacy, as her mother was always willing to protect and support those in need. On December 5, 1975, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a married couple was on their way home from a school basketball game. At around 8:30 p.m., the wife decided to visit her niece, Lindy, who lived nearby. They parked their car near the apartment complex, and she got out to quickly check on her niece, leaving her husband in the car. However, when she reached the apartment, she discovered that the front door was unlocked. Cautiously peering inside, she saw a knocked-over floor lamp and other items scattered around. The disarray of the apartment indicated that a fight had occurred. When she noticed strange stains on the floor resembling blood, she stepped into the living room. What she discovered would haunt her forever. In the center of the room lay Lindy, with a knife stabbed into her throat. Overwhelmed with panic, she ran out of the house and hurried to her car to call the police. The police arrived at the scene and were baffled about who could have had a conflict with the young 19-year-old girl, who had recently gotten married. They wondered what could have led to her brutal murder. Lindy Sue Beekler was born on January 31, 1956. Her parents divorced when she was very young. She was raised by her mother. Her father moved to the suburbs, remarried, and had a son with his new wife, making him Lindy's half-brother. From a young age, Lindy was curious and cheerful. She loved exploring new activities. Lindy participated in the Girl Scouts, went hiking, enjoyed boating, and joined different clubs. Lindy was a positive person who made everyone feel good. Her bright smile encouraged others to smile too. Above all, she treasured her family. One of her favorite things to do was curl up on the couch with her mother. In those moments, she felt like the happiest person alive because her mother was not only a caring parent, but also her best friend. Recently, Lindy had been employed at a flower shop, where her boss and co-workers described her as very hardworking, humble, and somewhat shy. However, once they got to know her better, Lindy revealed her fun side. She had a great sense of humor. Despite this, she preferred not to be the center of attention. Lindy married at a young age despite her insecurities. Her husband, Philip Beekler, was 5 years older than her. They first met when Lindy was visiting her sister. They were instantly attracted to each other. On October 19th, the year before the attack, Lindy and Philip tied the knot. The ceremony was officiated by Philip's grandfather, who blessed their union, saying they were perfect for one another. Philip worked part-time as an agent at a car rental company while studying art at Millersville State College. It appeared he was inspired by his parents. His mother owned an art gallery and was deeply passionate about art. Lindy is just 2 months away from turning 20 and has recently begun to embrace adult life as a married woman. Philip and Lindy were happily living together in their small one-bedroom apartment. However, Lindy felt uneasy being home alone. She never felt safe since they moved in. She constantly sensed that someone was watching her through the sliding glass door, though she couldn't pinpoint anyone specific. Overall, she was simply afraid to be alone in the apartment. In January, they planned to move to a new place in Manor Township. In the evenings, Lindy got home from work a couple of hours before her husband. She would lock the doors and turn on all the lights, carefully listening to every noise. During the investigation of the crime scene, the police found that Lindy had been stabbed 19 times. The attack involved 2 different knives. One knife, which the attacker had brought, was never found, while the other knife came from Lindy's kitchen. This kitchen knife was still in her neck when her aunt discovered her. Lindy's body showed 11 stab wounds to her chest and upper abdomen, 5 to her back, and 3 to her neck. One of the stabs had pierced the carotid artery, causing her to bleed to death. Experts noted that Lindy had defensive wounds on her hands, suggesting she fought fiercely for her life until the very end. The apartment was in chaos, with blood everywhere. It appeared that, after finishing her shift at the flower shop, Lindy had stopped to buy groceries, as bags of food were left on the kitchen table, still unpacked. This indicates that the attack occurred right after she returned home. Several pieces of evidence were collected at the crime scene. A shoe print, likely size 10 or 11, was discovered on the kitchen floor. This print suggested that the attacker was likely a large, strong man. Another piece of evidence hinted at a possible motive, although Lindy was fully clothed when found. Detectives suspected she had been abused. Male fluid was discovered on her underwear, which could provide the perpetrator's DNA. However, in 1975, forensic capabilities were limited. Experts could only identify the attacker's blood type and compare it with that of a suspect, but they needed to identify a suspect first. Unfortunately, that was where the evidence trail ended. The police also lacked the perpetrator's fingerprints, as the knife handle found in Lindy's throat was wrapped in a kitchen towel. The news of Lindy's tragic death devastated her family. Relatives called Philip at work, telling him he needed to come home immediately because something had happened to Lindy. As he rushed to their apartment, he feared the worst, but he could never have imagined that his beloved wife had been brutally killed. The police did not allow Philip inside the apartment, leaving him confused about what had happened. They kept him in the hallway until he found out the heartbreaking news that Lindy was dead. Seeing how pale he became, medics gave him a sedative, and the police took him to his mother's house. For about 4 days, Philip felt lost. He couldn't tell whether it was day or night or how much time had passed since the tragedy. He had to sit and wait for answers while the police continued their investigation. Detectives interviewed her co-workers and employer, and none of them noticed anything unusual about her behavior. Lindy went to work at the flower shop in a good mood. That day, she did not appear anxious or scared. There were no dissatisfied customers. Everything was completely normal. Lindy excitedly shared with her colleagues about the Christmas gift she had prepared for her husband. That evening, she calmly got into her car, waved goodbye to her colleagues, and drove home. Unbeknownst to anyone, it would be her last evening alive. Around 5:30 p.m. After work, Lindy went to the car dealership where her husband, Philip, worked to pick up his paycheck. She cashed the check at the bank and then went to a nearby grocery store to buy groceries, filling 4 bags. Afterward, she headed home, parked her car, and began unloading the bags. It seemed likely she would need to make 2 trips. At that moment, someone likely entered her apartment and attacked her. Detectives speculated on this since there were no signs of forced entry, and Lindy was not the kind of person to let a stranger into her home. This led the police to believe that Lindy knew her attacker, felt safe being alone with them. The first person the detectives looked at as a suspect was the victim's husband, Philip. However, the family and friends insisting that Philip and Lindy were a happy couple. Philip deeply loved Lindy and felt incredibly lucky to be dating her. Amazed that someone so beautiful would be interested in him, he said she changed his life for the better by inspiring him to enroll in college and pursue painting. In return, he supported her dream of opening a flower shop. When Lindy was killed, it devastated Philip. He couldn't bear to stay in their apartment, where every corner reminded him of her, so he moved out. Although he had a strong alibi, investigators were slow to clear him as a suspect. Following Lindy's death, Philip felt lost. He wandered the streets for hours, dropped out of college. They had dreamt of finishing their studies, starting a family, and planning their future together. Now, in an instant, all their dreams collapsed, like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. Philip had to completely rebuild his life in light of this tragic reality. The second suspect in the investigation was Bob, Lindy's direct supervisor. His favorable comments and positive evaluations of Lindy took an unexpected turn. The day before her tragic death, Lindy baked him blueberry muffins for his birthday. Bob spoke so highly of her that police began to question whether he had developed an inappropriate attachment. At 35 years old, single, and without an alibi, Bob caught the attention of the authorities. prompting them to scrutinize him more closely. The pressure became overwhelming, leading him to hire a lawyer to safeguard his privacy. Bob passed a lie detector test and fully cooperated with the police. After clearing both Lindy's husband and Bob as suspects, the police interviewed hundreds of people, including friends, family, and acquaintances. Yet they found no one who might have wanted to harm her. Neighbors were also questioned, but no one reported seeing anything unusual that day. The atmosphere in the apartment complex grew tense as residents began purchasing weapons for protection. While violence in other neighborhoods was concerning, the murder of a young woman next door felt particularly alarming. A note from the police was taped to the Beechlers' front door, indicating that it was a crime scene and restricting access for local residents. This served as a constant reminder of the tragedy and the unsettling reality that the killer might still be nearby. The investigation hit a dead end. The only clue from neighbors was a report of an unfamiliar dark-colored car parked outside Lindy's house at the time of her death, with its headlights on. Even if the driver was not involved in the crime, they could have been a witness. However, locating the car proved to be impossible. Neighbors' descriptions varied widely, and no one could recall the license plate number. Meanwhile, the police station was overwhelmed with calls. Although some leads seemed promising, none led to concrete answers, forcing investigators to develop their own theories. One theory suggested that Lindy was being stalked by someone who observed her and her husband's routines, waiting for the right moment to attack. It's possible the intruder entered the apartment while Lindy was unloading groceries, or that it was a burglar who planned to steal valuables, but panicked and assaulted her with a knife when she unexpectedly returned. However, the burglary theory was weak because Lindy's purse, containing her jewelry, was still in the apartment. Additionally, the nature of the abuse assault did not align with typical burglar behavior. The police eventually identified an 18-year-old suspect, who was arrested. He was known for committing terrible acts. He had already attacked 4 women, binding them with their own clothing and stabbing them with a screwdriver. In one instance, when a victim attempted to flee, he chased her in his car and tried to run her over. The location and timing of his crimes made the police suspect his involvement in Lindy's attack. However, investigations revealed he was not connected to that incident, as he was at work that day, supported by multiple colleagues. In December 1976, Lindy's family visited her grave to pay their respects. What they found left them in shock. Someone had vandalized the grave. The headstone was covered in knife marks. Pieces of it were scattered nearby, and the rest was splattered with red spray paint. The police took this incident seriously, as they believed the vandal might have also been involved in Lindy's death. The use of a knife suggested the vandal was aware of how Lindy had died, and notably, only her grave had been targeted in the entire cemetery. Since the family had kept the burial location private, it indicated that the vandal had intentionally sought it out, possibly by following family members. Unfortunately, the detectives were unable to identify the culprit. An entire year went by without any answers, leaving Lindy's family in a state of confusion and distress about what happened to her. In the following years, detectives looked into many people who were connected to Lindy's life. They examined her mother's boyfriend, looked into frequent customers of the flower shop, and even explored possible connections to serial killers active in Pennsylvania at that time. In their search for answers, they even consulted psychics. Despite these efforts, the case of Lindy Beechler's death remained unsolved. 25 years after Lindy's tragic death, the lead detective retired, leaving the Lindy case as one of the oldest unsolved cases in Lancaster County. In 2006, the investigation into Lindy's death was transferred to a special group in Pennsylvania that focused on old unsolved cases, utilizing new techniques and perspectives. However, they too were unable to make any progress. Decades after his wife's death, Philip Beechler discovered the DNA analysis techniques used to convict the perpetrator. He believed these methods could also be applied to his wife Lindy's case. In 2019, police applied these techniques to analyze DNA from the crime scene and created a composite sketch of a potential suspect based on the DNA. A computer program produced 2 portraits. One depicted how the suspect likely appeared at the time of Lindy's attack, and the other showed what the suspect might look like at age 65. While the portraits weren't exact representations, They revealed important details about the suspect, including fair skin, brown eyes, dark hair, and possible distinctive features. Despite this progress, locating the suspect was still difficult. The DNA sample was analyzed by C.C. Moore, a well-known American genetic genealogist. She discovered that the DNA found on the victim's underwear in 1975 was connected to a small town in Italy. Moore invested a lot of time identifying individuals with Italian ancestry who were living in Lancaster County at the time of Lindy's murder. She traced the migration patterns from this small Italian town to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. After ruling out over 2,000 individuals with similar genetic profiles, she was able to use public records to narrow it down to one suspect. This led her to identify the likely killer, a man named David Sinopoli. Investigators checked the name against existing databases, but found no records. This man had never been noticed by the police before, and his name was not on any suspect lists. However, while reviewing the case files, detectives learned that David lived in the same apartment complex as the Beechlers. To establish his connection to Lindy's death, they needed to obtain David's DNA. On February 11, 2022, David was at Philadelphia International Airport waiting for his flight. To pass the time, he bought coffee, not realizing that police were observing him from afar. After David finished his coffee, he threw the empty cup into a trash bin. An officer then discreetly collected the discarded cup and placed it in a plastic bag for further examination. The cup was sent to a lab for DNA analysis, which revealed a match between the DNA on the cup and the seminal fluid found on Lindy Beekler's underwear, confirming that David Sinopoli had been at the crime scene. Additionally, 2 drops of blood found on her stockings matched his DNA, providing further evidence. Initially, investigators thought the significant amount of blood at the crime scene belonged to the victim. However, they also considered the possibility that the perpetrator had injured himself and left behind traces of his blood. On July 17, 2022, around 7 a.m., police arrived at David's home, a few miles from the site where Lindy was murdered years earlier. He did not resist arrest, but his wife, who had been married to him for 36 years, was completely shocked. They had 3 children and 9 grandchildren, all of whom were unaware that they had been living with a criminal and murderer. Following the tragic murder of 19-year-old Lindy, David had lived quietly for nearly 47 years, never revealing his past and believing he would escape punishment. After David was arrested, Lindy's family had a reason to celebrate. Unfortunately, many family members never got to see justice served. Lindy's father died in 2000, and her mother followed in 2007. Her husband, Philip, was still alive and had remarried around 1990. Even though he hadn't initially planned to, he wanted to honor Lindy's hopes for him by finishing college, attending graduate school, and becoming an artist, which he accomplished. Eventually, he was able to let go of the tragedy and move forward with his life. The day after David's arrest, the police held a press conference announcing that they considered the case of Lindy Beekler's murder closed. Friends and family of David struggled to believe he was involved, thinking there must have been a misunderstanding. However, it's painful to acknowledge that this man evaded consequences for his actions for nearly 50 years, living as if nothing had happened after taking a young woman's future. Years went by, but the police never forgot about the case and continuously worked to solve it. Eventually, justice was served. David Sinopoli was taken into custody without the option for bail. Initially, he strongly denied any connection to Beekler's death, but as the trial date approached, he changed his mind and agreed to a plea deal. On October 19, 2023, 48 years after the crime, David Sinopoli pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, aggravated assault, and burglary. He received a prison sentence of 25 to 50 years. The judge mentioned that considering the defendant's age, this effectively amounted to a life sentence. David never explained why he killed Lindy by brutally stabbing her 19 times and violating her body to fulfill his selfish desires. Lindy and David were neighbors in the same apartment complex, but there is no evidence that they ever interacted prior to the crime. This leaves the true motives behind his actions a mystery, even to the police. It's possible that David was strongly attracted to her and eventually succumbed to his hidden urges. His primal instincts took over, which is why he is now in prison. On Valentine's Day in Tijuana, Elizabeth was excited about a second date with a man she had recently met. As usual, she let her family know where she was going, even shared her location for safety. Initially, everything seemed fine. However, her messages suddenly stopped. Her phone went quiet, and her car was missing. By the next morning, her family began searching everywhere for her, hoping to find any clue. What they uncovered shattered their hearts and revealed a more disturbing situation in the city. Elizabeth was not alone. Her case was just the start of a troubling pattern. Elizabeth Martinez Figueroa was born in 1996 in Tijuana, Baja California, a city on the border between Mexico and the United States. She was the youngest of 7 siblings. People who knew her described Elizabeth as a cheerful and gentle young woman who had a strong bond with her mother. Her mother was more than just a mother to her. She was her anchor, confidant, and main source of strength. By early 2022, Elizabeth accomplished something her family had never achieved before. She graduated with a degree in international trade and business from a private university. This was a significant milestone, but it didn't satisfy her ambitions. She aspired to pursue a master's degree to create more opportunities for herself and her family. While planning her educational journey, Elizabeth also managed a small clothing business. To boost her income, she worked as a dancer in a bar located in Zona Norte, a popular nightlife area for both tourists and locals. Like many women in her situation, Elizabeth was careful. She kept her family updated, especially when meeting clients. She shared her location, maintained communication, and trusted her instincts. This cautious habit would later play a crucial role in the effort to track her last movements. On February 14, 2022, Valentine's Day, Elizabeth seemed excited. She had lunch with her mother that afternoon, which turned out to be their last meal together. Later that evening, she had a second date with a man she had recently met at work. He was American. Elizabeth confided in her brother, expressing that while she was uncertain about him, her curiosity led her to give him another chance. Staying true to her usual habits, she promised to keep in touch, send updates, and share her location. Some reports indicate they met again at a bar, while others suggest she picked him up near a border crossing in her white SUV. They went to a Brazilian restaurant for dinner and then drove to a motel close to the beaches of Tijuana. Elizabeth informed her family that she would be gone for no more than 4 hours. At the start of the night, everything appeared normal. She kept sending her location, and her messages reassured her family about her safety. They knew where she was and who she was with. However, then the updates suddenly stopped. There were no more messages, no answered calls, and no signs that she was moving. This silence was not just worrisome, it was overwhelming. Her family's anxiety grew rapidly. The lack of communication was completely out of character for someone as careful and responsible as Elizabeth. It quickly became a clear sign that something was seriously wrong. As the hours went by, the feeling of dread intensified, marking the onset of a nightmare that no one was ready to face. When hours went by without any news of Elizabeth, her family didn't hesitate to take action. That same night, filled with fear and uncertainty, they started searching for her on their own. Their first stop was the bar where she worked, but the response they received was shocking. Elizabeth had not come in that day. Her concerned co-workers provided the family with an important lead, a detailed description of the man she was supposed to meet. They described him as overweight, with light brown skin and visible acne scars. He was a frequent customer at the bar, and although he didn't have a name, the description was detailed enough to help the family in their search. By February 15th, the family was increasingly worried due to the lack of news about Elizabeth. They decided to report her disappearance to local authorities, but encountered a common hurdle: bureaucracy. They were informed that they had to wait 24 hours before they could file an official report. Determined not to delay, they took to social media, creating pages, sharing photos, and soliciting the public's help. Despite their efforts, it felt as though Elizabeth and her white Jeep Liberty had completely disappeared. On February 16th, authorities officially expanded the report to include her missing vehicle. GPS tracking of Elizabeth's phone showed her movements, first to a Brazilian restaurant near the river, then to a motel, and finally to a park. The last recorded location was a downtown hotel in Tijuana. Her brother hurried there, but hotel staff denied him entry, and there was still no sign of Elizabeth or her Jeep. On Thursday, February 17th, her family used the vehicle's GPS history to track it to a street in Zona Norte. A sense of dread settled over them. Something was definitely wrong. Elizabeth's mother and brother drove directly to the location. Although the Jeep was there, Elizabeth was not. They called the police, and officers and firefighters arrived within minutes to secure the area. Their attention quickly turned to the trunk of the vehicle. What they discovered confirmed the worst fears of Elizabeth's family. Her lifeless body was inside, naked and curled up in a fetal position, exhibiting clear signs of violence. The heartbreaking scene devastated her family, leaving them in shock and disbelief. Elizabeth's family spoke out about her murder, the silence and inaction that preceded it. They highlighted a system that failed to respond when she went missing and the long wait for justice. The story quickly gained attention and sparked outrage throughout the city. Friends, co-workers, even strangers gathered at the scene. Elizabeth's body was taken to the forensic medical service for a complete autopsy. The findings were troubling. She had multiple blunt force injuries on her face, chest, and abdomen. A deep mark on her neck indicated an attempted strangulation. Additionally, there were signs of asphyxiation due to blockage of both her mouth and nose. Forensic experts determined that asphyxiation was the most likely cause of death. The investigation did not provide any information on possible abuse assault. Nonetheless, the case is officially categorized as a femicide, and an investigation is underway to find her murderer. The tragedy continued for the family after Elizabeth's passing. Just 3 days later, her mother suffered a sudden heart attack and died. Although the official cause was cardiac failure, many believed it was due to overwhelming grief that her body could not bear. As the family laid both mother and daughter to rest, the investigation picked up speed. Local and state authorities began to connect Elizabeth's case with others in the area. A frightening realization surfaced. This was not an isolated incident. The method of killing shared unsettling similarities with 2 other cases of young women who also worked in nightlife scene in Zona Norte. Karen, a 28-year-old mother from Veracruz, went missing on August 30th, 2021 after meeting a man at a motel. 3 days later, her body was discovered in a local garbage dump, showing obvious signs of violence. Karen had recently started working as a dancer and escort. She was careful about her safety, only meeting clients through direct phone calls. Before she left that day, she informed both a friend and a relative about her plans. Despite their quick efforts to find her, the situation ended in tragedy. Security cameras recorded the vehicle used by the man she met, and a friend later identified him from the video. However, surprisingly, no arrest warrant was issued, and the man remained at large. Angela Carolina Acosta Flores was only 20 years old when she was found dead in a hotel room on January 24, 2022, near the bar where Elizabeth worked. Like Elizabeth and Karen, Angela had gone to meet a man described as American and possibly of Hispanic descent. Her phone was missing from the crime scene, and when investigators traced it, they found it had been taken to Riverside, California, across the border. This discovery alarmed the investigators. 3 women had been brutally murdered, all linked by time, location, and method. Each case involved a mysterious man, likely American, and all 3 women were associated with the nightlife in the same area. They were killed within a 6-month period, leading to a troubling conclusion. There may be a serial killer targeting vulnerable women in Zona Norte. On Wednesday, November 16, 2022, the Baja California State Prosecutor held a highly anticipated press conference. With a room full of reporters and the nation watching, he confirmed a troubling presence. A serial killer was active in Tijuana. The prosecutor revealed that the suspect specifically targeted exotic dancers and escort who belonged to one of the city's most at-risk groups. His method was alarming. He would travel from the United States into Mexico, commit his crimes, and then escape back across the border, making it difficult for authorities to catch him. At that time, no additional details were shared to avoid compromising the investigation or alerting the suspect. Meanwhile, the manhunt for the killer was intensifying. Nearly a month later, on December 13th, The prosecutor held a second press conference. This time, the news was shocking. They had identified a suspect, an American citizen, whose psychological profile resembled that of Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers from the 1970s. However, there was a complication. The man had already left Mexico. Although a local arrest warrant was issued, it wasn't sufficient. Authorities sought a red notice from Interpol to enhance international cooperation. The FBI and U.S. consulates joined the search, and the suspect's physical description was made public to help locate him. Experts also conducted new forensic tests to ensure that no accomplices were missed. The breakthrough in the investigation came from detailed profiling. Investigators identified the man's methods. He targeted young women who were petite, attractive, and vulnerable. He portrayed himself as polite, respectful, and generous to gain their trust and lower their defenses. Once he had their confidence, he would lure them to secluded areas where he would then attack them. Each of the three known victims, Elizabeth Martinez, Karen, and Angela Carolina Acosta Flores, suffered extreme violence, with visible injuries primarily to their faces and chests. His method of asphyxiation was a defining characteristic. Two of the victims were found without clothes, while the third, although still dressed, had more injuries, indicating she may have fought back. This was not a crime of passion. It was deliberate, predatory, and systematic. Although these three cases gained media attention, they were not isolated. At the time of Elizabeth's disappearance, there were already rumors about other missing women with similar ages, professions, and unfortunate outcomes. Their stories have quietly faded away without resolution. As the investigation progressed, authorities were under pressure to act quickly. Although the suspect's identity remained confidential, local media labeled him as the Ted Bundy of Tijuana. His actual name was Bryant Rivera, a U.S. citizen with several known addresses in Southern California. Authorities searched these locations, but he was nowhere to be found. Family members described Bryant as working in e-commerce. Meanwhile, the Elizabeth's family was actively seeking justice for her. On February 14, 2023, marking 1 year since her murder, they revisited the site where her body was discovered and placed a floral tribute in the shape of a heart. Her brother spoke to reporters, expressing his deep sorrow and anger. A year had passed, and Bryant remained at large. The family's lawyer had been denied access to the case details, and the prosecutor's office had not provided any updates. Additionally, Elizabeth's Jeep Liberty, which was part of the crime scene, had yet to be returned. On July 6, 2023, Bryant was arrested in Los Angeles. The arrest took place calmly at his parents' home. However, he was only charged with the murder of Angela Carolina, while the murders of Karen and Elizabeth were not included in the U.S. charges, even though Mexico had made an active extradition request for all three cases. The Baja California prosecutor publicly confirmed Bryant's arrest, stating it was a result of collaboration between local and federal law enforcement agencies in the U.S. Bryant was assigned a public defender and requested bail. The judge denied the bail request, citing concerns about Bryant being a flight risk and a potential danger to women. He was ordered to remain in custody at Los Angeles County Jail. His family firmly rejected all allegations against him. His mother claimed he could never commit such acts of violence, and his sister even wrote a letter to support his character. However, the evidence suggested otherwise. On June 29, 2023, a federal judge in Los Angeles approved Mexico's request to extradite him. Family members of Angela were present at the hearing, along with the brother of Elizabeth. The courtroom was heavy with the sorrow of three grieving families. The judge emphasized that Bryant would remain in custody. As of June 2025, the extradition process is still ongoing. Legal experts estimate it could take up to 2 years to complete. If convicted of all three murders, Bryant could potentially face a total of 180 years in prison. However, due to Mexican law, the maximum sentence he could actually serve is 50 years. In addition, Mexican prosecutors have suggested that Bryant might be connected to a fourth victim, prompting them to investigate unsolved cases of missing women. Investigators are also re-examining surveillance footage from hotels and motels to determine if this predator has been active for a longer period than initially suspected. The situation surrounding Elizabeth has evolved from a personal tragedy to a representation of a larger national issue. Her death, along with the deaths of Karen and Angela, underscores the serious stigma and disregard that women in the escort industry encounter. When Elizabeth went missing, authorities did not intervene. Instead, it was her family who located her. It was her online activity, rather than official procedures, that ultimately pointed to her killer. Even now, despite an arrest, justice has not been achieved. The murder of Elizabeth Martinez Figueroa is a heartbreaking reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by women in Tijuana's nightlife and the devastating consequences of a system that too often fails them. Her vibrant spirit, her dreams of a brighter future, and her deep bond with her family were cruelly extinguished, leaving a void that echoes through her community. The cases of Elizabeth, Karen, and Angela reveal a chilling pattern of violence that demands urgent action. As Bryant Rivera's extradition process drags on, Elizabeth's family and countless others continue their relentless pursuit of justice, refusing to let her story fade into silence. This tragedy is not just a personal loss, but a rallying cry to confront the stigma, neglect, and impunity that perpetuate such crimes. When the police arrived at the house, they immediately sensed something was wrong. There were no broken windows or signs of forced entry. A quiet bedroom with a man lying on the floor in his pajamas. His glasses sat neatly on the nightstand. A kitchen knife and a cricket bat were nearby, and the door was tied shut with a bathrobe belt. The oddest detail was that his girlfriend, Jane Andrews, was missing. What happened that night, and where could Jane be? Jane Dawn Elizabeth Andrews was born on April 1st, 1967 in Cleethorpes, Lincolnshire, England. Due to financial difficulties, her family had to move to Grimsby, which was not their preferred choice. Her father, a joiner, had trouble finding steady work and often switched between temporary jobs, leaving the family without consistent support. Jane's mother managed the household by first working in social care and later as a teaching assistant. Although her job provided a stable income, it was not sufficient to meet their needs. Eventually, the family was forced to move into a much smaller home that lacked a bathroom, having only an outdoor toilet. Their situation was extremely challenging. They frequently searched the house for spare coins to buy a loaf of bread. Despite their struggles, they kept their difficulties to themselves, and their relatives were unaware of how tough their circumstances truly were. Jane was a bright and curious child. Her teachers recognized her potential. However, during her teenage years, she faced mental health challenges, including depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. As a result, her grades fell, and she started skipping school. When her mother discovered this, Jane felt ashamed. She didn't intend to rebel, but simply couldn't handle her situation. She began to feel hopeless and as though her life lacked purpose. Eventually, in a moment of profound despair, Jane tried to take her own life by ingesting a large number of pills. Although she survived, her mental health continued to worsen. As Jane got older, she found herself turning to brief relationships for comfort. At 17, she became pregnant, but realized that the father wasn't committed, and she felt unprepared to raise a child on her own. So, she made the tough decision to terminate the pregnancy. Initially, it seemed like the right choice, but it left her with lingering feelings of regret. To move forward, she enrolled in a fashion design program in high school. After graduating, she started working as a designer for children's clothing at a British retail chain. Although the job wasn't glamorous, it was a step in the right direction. However, she still lived with her parents in Grimsby, and she was unhappy there. Jane yearned for a better life. She spent hours perusing fashion magazines, envisioning herself in those stunning outfits adorned with designer jewelry. She wasn't just dreaming of success. She was truly desperate for a change and a way to escape. In 1988, 21-year-old Jane saw a job advertisement in a magazine. A busy mother needed a dresser to assist her with wardrobe and styling. Assuming the mother was wealthy, Jane applied, unaware that this would lead her to encounter royalty. 6 months later, Jane was invited for an interview and found herself meeting Sarah, the Duchess of York and wife of Prince Andrew. They connected well, And within a week, Jane received a life-changing letter confirming she got the job. Jane's journey took her from Grimsby to Buckingham Palace, entering a new world. Her starting salary was £17,000 a year, modest for royal standards. But what truly mattered to Jane was the privilege of access. She traveled worldwide with Sarah, mingled with aristocrats, and rapidly began to transform herself. She took elocution lessons to soften her northern accent and adopted new clothes, mannerisms, and even a different identity. She had a goal. Instead of just working for the wealthy, she wanted to become wealthy herself. She dreamed of marrying into money to escape her previous life. In April 1989, she met Christopher Dunn Butler, a butler who seemed to embody her dreams. He was 20 years older than her, a senior director at IBM, wealthy, sophisticated, and powerful, the perfect man for Jane. However, he was already in a relationship. Undeterred, Jane and Christopher began a secret affair, but Jane wanted more than secrecy. She offered Christopher an ultimatum. He had to choose between her and his current partner. He chose her, and soon their relationship was public. Within a year, they were engaged, and they married in August. What started as a fairy tale quickly turned sour. There was no passion or chemistry. They felt more like friends than romantic partners. Jane became restless again. She began having affairs one after the other, leading to the collapse of her marriage in 1994. The divorce didn't upset her. She had already met someone new, Dimitri Horn, a Greek businessman and son of a shipping magnate. They were introduced by the Duchess of York at another elegant event. Jane and Dimitri quickly became inseparable, enjoying fine dining, traveling, and living the romantic life she had always dreamed of. However, problems soon arose. Jane's jealousy resurfaced, growing increasingly intense. If Dimitri glanced at another woman, she noticed. If he spoke to one, she reacted with controlling and possessive behavior. Dimitri eventually reached his breaking point and ended the relationship. In a fit of rage, Jane didn't just leave, she vandalized his apartment, slashed his clothes, and destroyed his belongings in a turbulent frenzy. When things calmed down, she resorted to taking pills again. But this time, the overdose wasn't fatal. She woke up feeling broken and alone. A year later, in 1997, Jane faced another setback. After 9 years of working with the Duchess of York, she was let go. The official reason was budget cuts. With Sarah now divorced from Prince Andrew, she could no longer afford the same staff. However, rumors suggested a different story. Sarah had reportedly started dating an Italian businessman and was concerned that Jane might catch his interest. Although there was no concrete evidence, the fear of betrayal lingered. Jane felt deeply hurt. She had dedicated herself to her role and rebuilt her identity, only to be dismissed. One thing was clear. Though she was determined not to return to Grimsby, she would remain in London. She started a new job managing the public image of a hotel in London, but just 2 months later, she was let go due to her lack of experience, which was apparent to everyone. Soon after, she found another opportunity at a high-end jewelry store in the city center. Jane took the job, not for the paycheck, but for the wealthy and influential clients she would meet. She was eager to network again. In 1998, a friend set her up on a blind date with a man named Thomas Ashley Cressman. Jane was 31 and Thomas was 37. From their first meeting, Jane was enchanted by him. He was tall, attractive, and successful, everything she had ever hoped for. Thomas came from an American family that had moved to the UK. His father was a self-made multimillionaire who built a successful chain of car dealerships across Europe. Thomas enjoyed a life of privilege, attending private schools and studying at a university in the United States, which was a stark contrast to Jane's childhood, spent with outdoor toilets and searching for coins. Thomas loved cars, especially sports cars. He enjoyed working on engines, often spending hours building and modifying them. He was charming, enthusiastic, and attentive. During this time, he fell for Jane. While she was in Greece with friends, Thomas called her every day. When she came back, he welcomed her with a large bouquet of red roses. They quickly became inseparable. Within 3 months, Jane moved into Thomas's house, but old issues reappeared. Jane struggled with seeing Thomas interact with other women. She would hover, interrupt conversations, and pull him away. Even during innocent discussions, she needed to be the sole focus of his attention, and the possessiveness that had harmed her previous relationships returned. From the very start, Jane Andrews had one clear goal: to become Jane Cressman. She believed that Thomas was the perfect man for her: wealthy, handsome, romantic, and ideally suited to be her future husband. However, Thomas was in no hurry to commit, and Jane was quickly losing her patience. She started dropping hints in public, hoping that the pressure would encourage him to propose, but Thomas remained silent. Why was he hesitant? Was he having second thoughts? Or was there someone else Jane needed answers? So she decided to check his emails. There, she discovered her worst fear: messages exchanged with a woman he had met on a flight to the United States. She didn't know how serious their relationship was, but in Jane's mind, it could only mean one thing: he was cheating. That night, Jane confronted Thomas about the situation. He tried to reassure her that he had only met the woman once, and the emails didn't mean anything. However, Jane was extremely angry and humiliated, demanding to know the truth. To ease her frustration, Thomas suggested they take a trip to Italy. This trip was planned around a motorboat show that he couldn't afford to miss. After Italy, they would continue to the French Riviera, where his family had a vacation home. Jane agreed, secretly hoping that this trip would be special. As their 2-year anniversary approaches, she wished that, in the romantic setting of the Riviera, Thomas would finally propose. However, when they arrived, they were joined by friends. They spent their days enjoying boating, attending shows, and having fun. But Jane was still waiting for the proposal she desired. After days without any sign of a ring, she finally asked Thomas directly about their future. His response was disheartening. He said there would be no engagement, not now or ever, and he was starting to have doubts about their relationship. Jane was shocked. The reality she had built in her mind collapsed in an instant. They were arguing loudly, frustrated. She called a friend to express her feelings in detail, speaking loudly so others could hear her. Even during the car ride to the airport with Thomas, his mother, and his nephew, she continued to vent on the phone. The atmosphere was tense, but Jane was indifferent to everyone else's discomfort. On Sunday, September 17, 2000, 2 days after their return to London, Thomas's mother tried to call him. There was no answer. She kept calling, but still no response. She assumed Thomas and Jane were out, perhaps having lunch, or just needed some time apart. However, when Thomas still hadn't called by the next day, his mother's worry transformed into fear. By Monday afternoon, she decided to contact his workplace. That's when she truly began to panic. Thomas hadn't shown up for work at all and hadn't sent any messages. This was completely out of character for him. His mother asked one of his co-workers to check on him since the office was just across the street from Thomas's home, and they had a spare key. The employee knocked and rang the bell, but no one answered. He opened the door and called out, receiving only silence. The downstairs area was empty. He then went upstairs and found Thomas lying motionless on the floor, with blood surrounding him. The employee quickly went outside to call emergency services, but it was too late. When the police arrived, they discovered evidence that shocked everyone. A knife, which was missing from the kitchen, had been used to stab Thomas in the chest. Nearby, an abandoned cricket bat was found. Detectives suspected that Thomas had been struck on the head before being stabbed. There were no defensive wounds on his hands, indicating that he had not fought back. He had been attacked while sleeping in his pajamas, and his glasses were on the nightstand. Furthermore, there was no sign of forced entry. There were no broken windows or damaged locks. This indicated that the killer was already inside the house when the attack occurred. A pressing question occupied the minds of all investigators. Where was Jane Andrews? Her car was missing, and her phone was not in use. Was she a victim or the perpetrator? The police released a bulletin asking the public for any information regarding Jane's vehicle. Friends, including Sarah, tried to reach her, but there was no response. Then there was a breakthrough. Her car was seen on a highway west of London, and surveillance footage at a gas station confirmed that Jane had been driving alone. Meanwhile, evidence inside Thomas's home became increasingly incriminating. Handwritten notes were discovered, including one that stated, "Thomas is horrible to me, he treats me badly," and another that questioned, "What have I done?" Even more concerning was the finding of Jane's blood-stained clothes in the hallway, a bathrobe with the belt tied from the bedroom doorknob to the stair railing. If Thomas had survived the initial attack, he would have been trapped and unable to escape. Additionally, someone had taken a shower, as traces of Thomas's blood were found in the drain. This was not a crime of passion. It appeared to be premeditated. Jane Andrews was now missing, and investigators worried she might be trying to leave the country since her passport and credit cards were missing. Suddenly, her phone came to life with messages she was texting friends to ask about Thomas, feigning ignorance. Although her tone seemed relaxed and indifferent, the police remained suspicious. They traced her location through her messages and discovered she was still in England, on her way to Cornwall. Throughout the day, she sent multiple messages, but one friend maintained steady communication with her. That evening, Jane sent a disturbing message. She had taken a large number of pills. An immediate search was launched. Helicopters flew over the highways and countryside. 4 days later, her car was discovered parked in silence. Inside, Jane was found barely conscious, slumped in the back seat. She was taken to the hospital, where doctors pumped her stomach, and once again, she survived. When Jane woke up, she denied any involvement in Thomas's death, claiming she was unaware of what had happened and insisting she didn't kill him. Initially, she suggested that someone had broken into their home, but detectives quickly confirmed there was no evidence of a break-in. Later, she did admit to something, but not to murder. She said it was in self-defense. Jane explained to the investigators that their relationship had been abusive, stating that Thomas had physically assaulted her and that she had hidden a knife under the bed for her own protection because she was terrified of him. She explained that she had never shared her experience of abuse because she felt ashamed. She had never encountered such treatment before. Jane recounted that on the night Thomas died, he attempted to intimate with her, and when she refused, he slapped her, causing her to black out. She claimed she could not remember stabbing him and believed that Thomas was still alive when she left the house. But what truly happened? After returning from the French Riviera, the tension between Jane and Thomas escalated on their first day back and continued into the next morning. The house was filled with yelling. Jane was relentless, screaming and breaking things in Thomas's home. The man who once gave her roses now feared what she might do next. On Saturday, just before noon, Thomas called the police to report a violent argument. He warned the operator that the situation could escalate dangerously for either person involved. However, no officers were dispatched because there was no physical crime, only a heated disagreement. The operator advised them to calm down, but by the time things settled, Thomas had already died. By the end of April 2001, Jane Andrews was on trial at the Old Bailey. She admitted to killing Thomas Cressman but argued it was in self-defense. She portrayed him as abusive, controlling, and violent. But those who knew Thomas did not recognize this image of him. After nearly 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty. Jane Andrews was sentenced to life in prison for murdering her partner. She appealed the decision, but her appeal was denied. 9 years later, in 2010, Jane was transferred to an open prison, where inmates can leave during the day and return at night. However, one day she failed to return and was missing for 2 days. Eventually, she was found in a hotel just 6 miles away, where she had been meeting her parents. Although there were no penalties for her absence, it negatively affected her parole hearing. As a result, her release was denied in 2012. In 2015, 4 years later, officials determined that Jane was no longer a threat to society. She was granted parole and was released after spending 14 years in prison. Unfortunately, her freedom was short-lived. In 2018, she was arrested again for harassment and spent another year behind bars. When she was released on August 8, 2019, she moved to Lincolnshire and began a new life working in a supermarket. Stocking shelves. Jane experienced a dramatic journey, moving from royal palaces to prison and, ultimately, to a life of quiet anonymity. During her time in custody, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by intense emotional fluctuations, impulsive behavior, a profound fear of abandonment, and unstable relationships. Some experts suggest that this condition accounts for her violent outbursts, particularly her difficulty in coping with rejection, which was a significant factor in Thomas's murder. However, her mental health issues did not change the facts of the case, nor did they affect her sentencing. Thomas Cressman was just 39 years old. He had a bright future, a family, and many plans ahead of him. His death was sudden, brutal, and without reason. May we always remember him and let his story serve as a reminder of how fragile love can be, as well as the importance of asking for help when needed.
Is it possible to distort a sober mind so much that a person would take up arms and go on a killing spree? Today's story shows that it is indeed possible. It is hard to find a more merciless and senseless attack. Morgan Metzer and her husband, Rodney Metzer, were inseparable, as often joked by their friends, family. They met when she was 14 and he was 17. From the moment they met, it was love at first sight. What followed was a tender, loving relationship that continued to develop until they decided to tie the knot in 2009. Morgan was just 21 years old at the time. After their wedding, they went on a honeymoon, and upon returning, both continued to build their lives, strengthen their love. However, not everything went as smoothly as they had hoped. Less than a year into their marriage, Rodney suffered his first major loss. His younger brother Kevin, who had just turned 19, died of leukemia. According to Morgan, her husband changed after that, becoming harsher and more rude. She believed that this behavior would gradually pass and that her husband would return to normal. But even after years, he did not change and instead became increasingly cruel. Rodney began to cling to her for any reason, was very demanding, and did not tolerate criticism. Despite this, Morgan remembered the beginning of their life together fondly and did not want to leave her husband, hoping that everything would work out. On March 15, 2011, they had their first child, a boy named Kevin in honor of Rodney's deceased brother. Morgan and Rodney believed that this baby would allow them to restore their relationship and make Rodney more gentle. However, Kevin was born 2 weeks prematurely with a congenital heart defect. The child lived only 18 days before passing away, never having been discharged from the hospital. This tragedy hit the young father even harder and, of course, traumatized Morgan. She later described that moment as one in which she felt as if she had fallen out of reality, so much so that she could barely remember that period. Despite the tragedy, the Metzer coped. 3 months after losing their first child, they learned that Morgan was pregnant again, this time with twins. They welcomed this second chance to become parents and hoped that things would turn out differently this time. The children were born in 2012 and were healthy. However, contrary to expectations, the tension between the spouses only grew. Morgan often communicated with her loved ones and described her relationships with them during this period as psychological abuse. For the first time, she suspected that she had been living in a delusion all these years. She began to realize that her husband was a manipulative person who cruelly controlled her. Looking back, she recognized that Rodney had always been like this. It just took time and significant trauma for his true behavior to manifest fully. Many believed that Morgan had fallen into the trap of a manipulator because of her lack of life experience. She had been with him since she was 14 and had never been in another relationship. In fact, she did not know that it could be different. The situation only worsened when Rodney lost his job. Morgan was on maternity leave and caring for the twins, which meant she could not earn money. Their financial situation became difficult. Rodney soon had to take on 2 jobs to provide for their large family. He became very tired, which only made him angrier. Morgan decided to take action. When the children grew a little, she took matters into her own hands and opened a small interior design business. Contrary to her husband's expectations, Morgan was successful. She began to earn good money. Against the backdrop of her relatives' depressed state, she even became the primary breadwinner in the household. She hired her best friend to work with her. The first confirmation of Morgan's success came in 2020 when she received an award in her hometown for the best interior design. Rodney did not support her during this time. On the contrary, he felt like a failure compared to his more successful wife. He became more jealous and angry. He escalated from psychological violence to physical abuse. This happened for the first time during one of their joint weekends when they went boating together. They had an argument on the water, and when they returned home, Rodney hit his wife several times. This was a shocking moment for Morgan, as Rodney had always spoken out against physical violence and positioned himself as a fighter for women's rights. He had always presented himself as a kind and sensitive person, even refusing to watch films that depicted cruelty to women. His punch was the breaking point. Morgan now realized with horror who she had spent most of her life with. That night, she called her father and asked him to pick her up from their lake house. When her father arrived, Rodney denied hitting her. He then fully demonstrated his manipulative nature, somehow convincing all of Morgan's friends that she had given herself a couple of bruises to make him look bad. According to him, during an argument, she would hit herself, leaving marks on her own face. He claimed that any bruises on her resulted from his attempts to stop her crazy behavior for her own good. The manipulator went further. He had been communicating with his wife for a long time and even managed to convince her that she was partly to blame for what had happened. From that moment on, Rodney began to use this tactic constantly. He influenced her and set his wife up so that she gradually began to believe that the problems and quarrels in their family were her fault. He even blamed her for his career problems. At this point, the violence against Morgan only intensified. In addition to the psychological impact, she also suffered from abuse. But this could not continue forever. In 2020, Morgan decided it was time to put an end to it and filed for divorce. This decision immediately felt like a breath of fresh air. In December 2020, the marriage was officially dissolved. Morgan decided to move on, but she could not completely rid herself of her ex-husband since they had children together. When the decision to divorce was made, they did not go to court to divide custody. Instead, they agreed on everything verbally and remained on good terms in order to spare the younger generation from further hurt. The former spouses communicated closely and even took a joint trip to Florida to visit Morgan's sister before Christmas. Morgan and Rodney insisted that although the marital relationship was over, they continued to get along well for the sake of the children. Suddenly, on New Year's Eve, Morgan was attacked. Early in the morning of January 1, 2021, Rodney arrived at his ex-wife's house. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. So, he walked around the house, thinking she was still asleep, calling her name. Suddenly, he found her on the back porch. She was lying partially naked on the deck with her hands tied behind her back and a pillowcase over her head. She was obviously badly hurt. Rodney provided first aid and asked her what had happened. He then called 911. Upon arrival, law enforcement officers recorded that Morgan had been subjected to cruel treatment, abuse, and beating. She was very scared and had difficulty explaining what had happened. Morgan stated that a stranger in a black mask had broken into her home that night, attacked her, hit her in the face, strangled her several times until she lost consciousness, and abused her. He threatened to kill her and even mentioned her ex-husband and relatives who no longer lived with her. The police began to investigate what had happened. In the presence of her relatives, who were already there, they recorded Morgan's story. She had intended to spend this New Year's Eve with her best friend. She waited until the new year, drank a glass of champagne, and realized she was too tired from the shocks of the previous month, so she decided to go home and go to bed early. Her friends had argued a little about this, but Morgan insisted that she wanted to rest and regain her strength. At that time, her 8-year-old children were visiting her parents, giving Morgan the opportunity to enjoy her first good night's sleep in several weeks. Morgan returned home, turned on the security system, and went to bed. She woke up during the night, feeling that someone was in the room. Morgan noticed a dark figure in the doorway. At first, she thought she was imagining things. When she looked closely, she realized this was not a dream. The man was dressed in black and wore a mask that looked like Batman's. The tall figure appeared very menacing, standing with his fists clenched as if preparing to attack. A gun appeared in Hai's hand. He pounced on the defenseless woman, hit her with the weapon, and then punched her in the face several times. After that, he turned her over onto her stomach and tied her hands behind her back with makeshift restraints made from plastic zip ties. She begged him to let her go, but the man ignored her pleas, only throwing out a few phrases about how she would regret what she had done. Morgan had the feeling that the stranger was deliberately straining his voice, as if trying to imitate Batman's tone and image. The most horrific aspect for her was the beatings and strangulation. She lost consciousness several times, and each time she regained it, the violence resumed. Morgan was convinced she would not survive the night. The criminal tortured her, bringing her to the brink of death and then allowing her to breathe. This became the worst memory of Morgan's life. She even said she had an out-of-body experience because of the attack, as if she had left her body and was witnessing her own death. She abstracted herself from the events, thinking about her children and what would happen to them. She remembered that she had not even had time to write a will. Meanwhile, the beatings continued. The attacker abused Morgan while continuing to hit her in the face and head. When Morgan later recounted this to law enforcement officers, she expressed disbelief that anyone could want to do such a thing to her. However, she was sure that the voice changes and the dark clothing covering every part of the attacker's body were meant to prevent her from recognizing him, suggesting that he must have been familiar with her. Experienced detectives agreed with this assessment. It is worth noting that the criminal threatened not only Morgan but also her husband. Despite being officially divorced at this time, during another instance of strangulation, the attacker said she would miss her husband. At that moment, Morgan suspected that Rodney himself could be behind the attack. Once this thought crossed her mind, she attempted to play his usual psychological game. Instead of addressing her attacker directly, she began to manipulate his feelings, begging him not to hurt Rodney because she loved Rodney very much. As soon as she said this, the assault immediately stopped. The criminal ceased beating her, left her on the bed, and began walking around the room looking for valuables, likely to steal. When this change occurred, Morgan realized that she had managed to save her life. The criminal had completely altered his behavior and began to act not like a murderer but as a robber. He took the first thing he could find from her locker and then asked for her phone number and password. As it turned out, he was not interested in bank cards but in the security system. There were several video cameras installed in the house that recorded the attack. After rummaging through her mobile phone, he carried she out onto the back porch and left her there, telling her that she should not move until she heard 2 car horns, otherwise, he would return and shoot her. He put a pillowcase over her head so she couldn't see anything. Morgan lay in this state for more than half an hour. She didn't hear any beeps, but she decided it was better not to take any chances and continued to lie still. It seemed to her that the criminal might be hiding nearby and watching her. It is worth noting that Morgan lived in a remote area of the city, where there were few houses nearby, so she could not even call for help. When about 40 minutes had passed in this state, Morgan heard extraneous noises and footsteps. She thought that the criminal might have changed his mind and was now returning to kill her. When the steps got closer and stopped, she heard the familiar voice of her relatives. Rodney had found his ex-wife there, bound in plastic zip ties with a pillowcase over her head. It was about 2 a.m. The very appearance of her ex-husband in Morgan's house at that time seemed strange. The children were visiting their grandparents, and they had not arranged to meet. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Morgan kept herself in check. She pretended to be hysterical, did not chase her ex away, and did not accuse him of the attack. On the contrary, Morgan began to act more cunningly. She tried to persuade Rodney to stay with her, call for help, and not go anywhere. In fact, her goal was to keep the alleged criminal there until the police arrived. When the emergency services were called, several police officers went to Morgan's house. At this time, Rodney was sitting outside in his car. This seemed odd, since he was the one who found his wife tied up and beaten. It would have been logical for him to be next to her, waiting for help. Instead, he was acting cautiously and even somewhat hostile. The law enforcement officers immediately began to ask themselves the same questions that had appeared in Morgan's head. What was her ex-husband doing in the house at 2 a.m. on New Year's Eve, just 40 minutes after the attack? Rodney justified his behavior by claiming romantic feelings and mentioning a strange young man. He said he was celebrating New Year's alone and thinking about his ex-wife. When a stranger stopped in front of the window and wrote the name Morgan on the frozen glass, it seemed alarming, so he decided to call her. After several unsuccessful attempts, he decided to go to the house himself because he felt that something was wrong. Rodney lived 15 minutes away from his ex-wife, so he arrived at her house relatively quickly, and for good reason. She really needed help. Detectives soon began to assess the situation, Morgan was so beaten that one of her eyes was swollen and almost completely shut. It was obvious that she had been the victim of a brutal attack by someone who was emotionally upset or angry at her, rather than by a random stranger or a burglar. Morgan's father and brother soon arrived at the scene. It was decided to speak to everyone present separately. Once Morgan was pulled aside, out of earshot from the rest of the family and her ex-husband, she made a significant confession. She claimed that it was Rodney who had not attacked her and was now posing as her savior to divert suspicion away from himself. The victim described the sequence of events in detail, including the moment when she began to profess her love for her ex, after which the beating abruptly stopped. She insisted that she recognized her ex-husband's touch, for example, when he lifted her from the bed to carry her to the porch. Morgan admitted that all this time she had deliberately kept Rodney nearby by asking him to stay with her. Morgan was afraid that if she directly accused her ex, he could kill her to cover his tracks. From a psychological perspective, this seemed plausible, as the most dangerous period for a woman who has been in a manipulative relationship for a long time is often the breakup. Morgan stated that for a week after the divorce, Rodney continued obsessively trying to maintain contact, seeking her pity. He even claimed that he had cancer, showing her a doctor's report. Considering that his brother had died of leukemia and his father was battling cancer during that period, this strategy evoked sympathy. Naturally, this sympathy did not lead to anything good. He was simply trying to get closer again because of his feelings. Morgan allowed him to spend the night at her house. A couple of days later, Rodney began persistently pushing to restore their relationship through pity and manipulation. By December 31st, she had realized this and finally broke off contact with him, cutting off her support. Rodney returned to his apartment, but less than a day later, she was brutally attacked. Throughout that day, Rodney tried to persuade her to rekindle their relationship, even stating that he had found a new high-paying job for her sake. He slipped a check for $56,000 under her door on New Year's Eve. Curiously, the man who attacked Morgan stole that check. None of this seemed like a coincidence. When Morgan laid out the facts to the police, her greatest fear was that the detectives would believe her manipulative ex-husband instead of her. This had happened multiple times before, even with people close to her. It was a huge relief when one of the detectives remarked that her story sounded quite convincing and that Rodney should be scrutinized closely. The detectives decided to catch the criminal in a lie, and to do this, they needed to verify each of his statements. They started with the calls he claimed to have made to his wife before he arrived. Morgan denied receiving any calls when the bastards took her cell phone. When investigators checked Rodney's phone, not only were there no outgoing calls on it, but there were numerous undressed photos of his ex-wife, taken as if she were unaware. Judging by the dates, the photos had been taken systematically over the week while Rodney was staying at her house after announcing that he had cancer. It appeared he had been filming her secretly. Additionally, Rodney had numerous photos of her phone, which contained conversations with other men. All this looked like stalking and confirmed the words of Morgan. When Morgan was asked about the photos, she stated that she had no idea about them and had not given permission for them to be taken. This alone was reason enough to bring charges, as it was considered a serious invasion of privacy. Rodney was detained and told outright that he was the assailant. He acted as if this was absurd. After checking Morgan's mobile phone, the police discovered that the criminal had deleted all the footage from the CCTV cameras in her home. However, this also indirectly confirmed the guilt of Rodney, since a random robber could hardly know about the security system of a random victim or how to use it. If the criminal was aware of the cameras, he would likely have chosen a less protected target. It was curious that the intruder knew how to enter the house without triggering the alarm. There were special sensors on all the doors and windows of Morgan's home. They were checked, and no signs of a break-in were found. The entire system remained operational, with the exception of one single window leading to the basement. As it turned out, the intruder had entered through this window. The switch was moved so that it did not work. Presumably, Rodney moved it on purpose while living there after the divorce, as he was planning an attack. The day after the arrest, the police received a search warrant for the suspect's home. When checking for sources of information, they found even more circumstantial evidence. Rodney's browser history was full of disturbing queries, such as, how much do you have to strangle a person to make them lose consciousness but not die, and how to change your voice. He had read an entire book about various psychological techniques for influencing women, titled 7 Ways to Be a Hero to Your Wife. The doctor's note that confirmed Rodney's cancer diagnosis turned out to be fake. He had created a fake email account specifically to send himself a report from a fictitious doctor. During interrogation, Rodney found excuses for every suspicious fact that the police uncovered. After the first interrogation, the detectives decided that they did not have enough evidence against the main suspect. Rodney was released, and the investigation continued. The big problem for him was the plastic zip ties found in the apartment. Rodney had modified and cut them in a special way to make improvised handcuffs that could be quickly put on and secured to the hands. A whole package of such items was found in his apartment, as well as several sets that had been modified in the same way as those taken from Morgan's hands. When asked about the zip ties, Rodney claimed he had never owned any, as if he had never bought them. Perhaps someone had planted them on him to frame him. Even though they were found in his apartment, the police needed to confirm that Rodney was their owner. They then began checking local hardware stores. That same day, detectives found a video recording of the main suspect buying the zip ties. After that, Rodney didn't even know what to say. The most terrifying finding was the note. A farewell letter was discovered in the relative's apartment, indicating that he had planned to kill Morgan and then himself, leaving the children orphaned. Morgan miraculously managed to save herself by using a psychological trick that stopped the criminal and made him change his mind. He probably thought that not all was lost and that he could get back together with his ex-wife. The hope of a reunion actually saved her life. Among the most valuable pieces of evidence was a video of the facade of the apartment building where Rodney lived. No one came to the windows, and no one wrote Morgan's name with their finger. The criminal himself returned scene after the attack, having been inside for about 4 minutes. Presumably, during this time, he changed his clothes and disposed of the evidence. When leaving the apartment, before driving back to his house, he carried a black bag with him, which he discarded. Unfortunately, it was not found, but investigators believed that Rodney had thus disposed of material evidence. Just 1 day later, Rodney was arrested again. This time, in addition to the charges of violating privacy, they added a whole list of charges that included trespassing, damaging someone else's property, possession of a firearm, robbery with a weapon, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and abuse. He was held without bail. During this period, Morgan's children continued to live with her parents. When she took her twins, there was a difficult conversation in which she tried to explain that their father would no longer be around. For months, Morgan woke up from nightmares, dreaming of an attack, a mask, and a threatening voice. Sometimes, she couldn't even muster the strength to send her children to school because she was afraid to be alone in the house. The prosecutor's office had enough evidence against Rodney to put him behind bars. To avoid subjecting Morgan to the hardships of a trial, a plea deal was offered, and they both agreed to it. 8 months after the attack, on August 4, 2021, Rodney Metzer pleaded guilty to 14 counts related to the assault on his ex-wife. He was sentenced to a total of 70 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 25 years, it is understood that the remainder of the sentence will be served on probation. In fact, he will never leave the authorities' sight again for the rest of his life. Interestingly, he forbids even his own mother from visiting him in prison. Rodney is expected to be released in 2046. Morgan underwent therapy and has actually recovered from the trauma she experienced. Morgan said she is dedicated to helping women in similar situations as she was. She is also focused on raising her children.
The morning of June 21, 2016 was scorching, just like most summer days in Riverside County, California. A local motorcyclist was riding along a rural road near Lake Matthews when he pulled off the highway and noticed a motionless figure on the shoulder. A man was lying on his back. His face was partially disfigured, and his clothes were soaked in blood. The nature of the injuries pointed to a violent crime, several stab wounds followed by a shot to the head. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene, nor any indication that the crime had occurred there. Everything suggested that the body had been transported and dumped after the crime. Investigators later identified the victim as 25-year-old Justin Hilbert, a resident of Riverside. On the evening of June 20th, he left the home he shared with his partner, Tanya Rep, and never returned. Their son was just 6 months old at the time. Justin had recently finished a technical training program and had just started a new job. His life seemed to be turning around, but it came to an abrupt end. The investigation immediately hit roadblocks. Justin had no known enemies, no debts, and those close to him reported no ongoing conflicts. Tanya Rep was born in California in the mid-1980s. She grew up in a stable, working-class household, became independent early, from a young age. She demonstrated responsibility and strong ambition. She worked in logistics, was known for her organizational skills, reliability. In the 2000s, Tanya met Jared Bischoff. He appeared mature, dependable, and strong. Their relationship progressed quickly. They married not long after. However, their marriage began to crack under pressure. Tension and power struggles grew more frequent over time. Jared became increasingly controlling and aggressive. He displayed jealousy, exerted emotional pressure, eventually resorted to physical force. Tanya refused to accept that behavior. She began gathering evidence, preparing for a divorce. The process was long and painful. Jared refused to let go, resisted the separation. He tried to maintain influence over her at any cost. Jared served in the U.S. Marine Corps. After leaving the military, he returned to California and struggled to find stable work. He had a determined, persistent character. Outwardly, he seemed calm and dependable, but beneath that facade, there was volatility and a desire for control. He viewed the marriage not simply as a personal relationship, but as his territory, one he would not allow interference in. After the divorce, he couldn't accept that Tanya had moved on. He especially struggled when she began seeing another man. Though he claimed to have come to terms with it verbally, he continued to interfere. He showed up near her home, monitored her activities, applied pressure, and issued threats. He didn't see his behavior as stalking. In his mind, it was about restoring justice and trying to regain lost control. Justin Hilbert lived in Riverside, California. He was just beginning to build his adult life. After years of side gigs and searching, he enrolled in a technical school, graduated, and landed a full-time job maintaining industrial equipment. Justin was calm, avoided conflict. In early 2015, he met Tanya. At the time, she was finalizing the end of a difficult marriage. Their first conversations felt easy, natural. Justin didn't push, didn't rush things, and never made demands. He simply showed up, listened, offered support, and helped when needed. Over time, Tanya and Justin developed a strong bond. They didn't move in together immediately, but they started to spend more time as a couple. With Justin, Tanya felt a sense of safety she hadn't experienced in a long time. When she discovered she was pregnant, Justin responded with calm and support instead of fear. He became more engaged, helping to prepare for the baby. And by early 2016, they were living together. In January, their son was born. He quickly became the focal point of their lives. Justin embraced fatherhood, learning how to swaddle, bottle feed, care for him at night, and take him for walks. Although they weren't legally married, their family and friends saw them as a complete family unit. Justin's parents welcomed Tanya into their lives, and she often spent time with them, creating a warm home environment. Justin had no ties to Jared and was unaware of how deeply Jared was affected by the changes in Tanya's life. All Justin wanted was to create a stable, loving family together. Bailey Sharp, the youngest person in this story, was born in the early 1990s in Seattle to a family involved in law enforcement. As a child, she was energetic, enjoyed science and sports. However, her life took a turn during her teenage years when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and lupus. The chronic pain and medical limitations significantly impacted her mental health. By the age of 16 or 17, she began using marijuana, progressed to prescription painkillers, and eventually sought out stronger drugs. Despite going through rehabilitation multiple times and experiencing periods of recovery, she faced ongoing relapses. By 2015, her social connections in Seattle had weakened, and her family relationships were strained, prompting her to move to California in search of a fresh start. In California, she struggled with unstable housing and unemployment. She would sometimes stay with acquaintances, frequent bars, and visit low-budget venues. It was at one of these places that she met Jared Bischoff, Tanya's ex-husband. Jared soon became a controlling figure in her life, using her vulnerability and dependence for his own gain, rather than seeking a romantic relationship. On June 20, 2016, the day in Riverside began like any other. Justin was spending time with Tanya and their 6-month-old son. They talked about Justin's early shifts at his new job and made plans for the week. Everything felt peaceful. In the afternoon, Tanya mentioned a strange conversation she had the night before. A woman named Bailey had sent her a message, alleging that Justin was being dishonest and living a double life. Tanya showed the messages to Justin, who read them carefully and firmly stated that they were false. He remained calm and suggested that someone was trying to create tension between them. Justin assured Tanya that he would find out who was behind the messages. He understood why she might doubt him and reassured her of his love and honesty. At around 9 p.m., Justin mentioned that he needed to step out for a little while. He didn't provide many details, but it was typical for him to briefly leave to grab tools, visit a friend, or get some fresh air. He prepared to go without any fuss, kissed his son, told Tanya he would be back soon, and left with his keys. Everything seemed normal at the time. However, hours went by and Justin did not return. Tanya tried texting him and then called, but there was no response. By midnight, his phone was turned off. Worry began to creep in. She stayed up, repeatedly checking messages and calling, hoping to hear from him, but there was silence. Justin had never spent the night away without informing her. At around 8 a.m. on June 21st, Tanya received a short text from Justin's number that simply said, "Don't wait, it's over." There was no greeting and no explanation. The message felt strange and uncharacteristic of Justin. Sensing that something serious had occurred, she quickly texted his mother and called his sister. Unfortunately, no one knew Justin's whereabouts. That morning, Riverside County authorities received a report about a man on a motorcycle who was riding down a rural road near Lake Matthews. He noticed a body lying face up, with clothes soaked in blood. There were no indications of a struggle. A medical examiner later confirmed that the victim died from a gunshot wound to the head, but there were also knife wounds that had occurred beforehand. All evidence pointed to the conclusion that the victim had been attacked elsewhere and then left in that location. The police identified the victim as Justin Hilbert. His earlier disappearance and a previous message now made a chilling connection. After discovering the body, investigators quickly began their work. The condition of the remains suggested that the crime likely occurred the previous night. Once they confirmed the victim's identity, officers visited the Justin home. Tanya stated that Justin left around 9 p.m. and had not returned since. The police recorded her statement and collected his possessions. They also noted that his dark blue sedan was missing and entered it into the National Database for Missing Vehicles. Upon examining Justin's clothing, they found that several personal items were absent. He usually carried his phone, work badge, and wallet, but none of these were found. It was evident that someone had intentionally tried to cover their tracks. Interviews with Justin's friends and colleagues provided minimal information. No one was aware of any problems or threats. Everyone characterized him as calm. There were no debts, lawsuits, or any clear motive. The case took a turn when investigators examined Tanya's recent messages. One name caught their attention: Bailey. She had reached out to Tanya just before Justin disappeared. A record search revealed Bailey Sharp, who is registered in San Bernardino County but does not have a permanent address. She is a young woman with a history of arrest related to banned substance. Bailey became the first major lead for investigators. There were no records of a job, insurance, lease, driver's license, or vehicle in her name. The only clue was the phone number she texted to Tanya. The police then examined the contacts associated with that number, identifying a man named Jared Bischoff, who is Tanya's ex-husband. There was no clear proof that Bailey and Jared were working together, but the circumstances were troubling. A woman with a questionable past suddenly contacting Tanya. That same phone number had also frequently reached out to Tanya's ex. Suspecting wrongdoing, investigators requested mobile device location data for the night of June 20th to 21st. Bailey's phone showed location pings in southern Riverside, near where Justin's body was eventually discovered. Investigators also examined Bailey's associates. Social workers reported spotting her with different men in parking lots and bars, but their identities were unknown. As a result, the investigators turned their attention to digital records. They found that the IP address used for Bailey's social media logins was the same as the one linked to Jared's account. This raised suspicions within the investigative team about a potential ongoing connection between Bailey and Jared. Although the exact nature of their relationship was unclear, to avoid raising suspicions among potential suspects, the investigators chose to carry out surveillance quietly and continue collecting information. They began by confirming the locations of the suspects and checking if they were together. There was still no direct evidence. Investigators initially overlooked another possibility until they analyzed the messages exchanged between Tanya and Bailey. They became increasingly convinced that these texts were part of a deliberate setup meant to instigate doubt, jealousy, and resentment in Tanya. Bailey suggested that Justin was living a double life, cheating, and portrayed herself as the true victim. However, the messages lacked concrete evidence and details. One notable aspect was the overly polished language. The texts sounded scripted rather than expressing genuine personal distress. This led to a new consideration. Either someone else had composed the messages, or Bailey was not acting independently. Cell phone records indicated that while texting, Bailey was connected to a public Wi-Fi network at a bar in Murrieta. Investigators promptly secured the bar's surveillance footage. The video showed a woman who looked like Bailey sitting in a back corner and using her phone. Beside her was a man who sometimes leaned in to speak with her, pointed at her screen, and then walked away. The poor video quality made it difficult to identify the man. Later, investigators uncovered an important fact. The message Tanya received on the morning of June 21st from Justin's phone was not actually sent by him. By that time, Justin was already dead, and his phone was with Bailey Sharp. This revelation was unsettling. Bailey had intentionally sent that message to create a false assurance, preventing Tanya from panicking and making it appear as if Justin had left willingly. The goal was to calm her down and delay her from contacting the authorities, which was part of a calculated plan to postpone the discovery of the crime and evade law enforcement. The suspects made a critical error by not recognizing how easily digital activity can be tracked today. The way messages were structured, the entry points to their network, and the movements of phones all indicated a coordinated plan. Bailey's actions raised further suspicion. Just one day after Justin went missing, she turned off her phone and disappeared. This didn't seem like a reaction of panic. It appeared to be premeditated. Once the police started searching for Bailey Sharp, they struggled to locate her. Her phone was off, and she wasn't sending any messages. The only clue they had came from surveillance footage from a pharmacy in Paris on the evening of June 22nd, about 24 hours after Justin's body was discovered. Bailey was seen on camera alone, wearing a medical mask and a hooded sweatshirt, purchasing pain relievers and bottled water. She used an ID that belonged to someone else. The clerk couldn't remember details, but the cameras recorded everything. After that, she vanished once more. She was declared a wanted person, and local law enforcement agencies were notified. Her photo, aliases, descriptions, and known connections were added to the system. Investigators concluded that if she were merely a witness, she would not be hiding. Her disappearance turned her into a suspect, but there was no concrete evidence linking her to the crime, and no one had presented clear testimony against her. The case relied on circumstantial evidence, coincidences, strange messages, and her unexpected disappearance. Police observed a recurring pattern. In recent weeks, Bailey had been spotted multiple times in Riverside, near a secluded residential complex. Surveillance cameras captured images of her vehicle, followed by footage of another car. It seemed improbable that she could go into hiding on her own. Someone was likely providing her with shelter or accompanying her. A bigger question arose. If Bailey was just the bait, Who was truly behind this entire situation? Who orchestrated it all? The answer started to become clear on the morning of June 24th when the Department of Motor Vehicles provided some information. The second vehicle that was often seen near Bailey was registered to Jared Bischoff. This name had already been mentioned in the case files. Jared is the ex-husband of Tanya, who lives with Justin. Until that point, the police had no reason to link him directly to Justin's disappearance, but now his vehicle had been spotted near the location where the main suspect was hiding. Investigators started looking into Jared's history. He was a former Marine with several years of service and had worked in warehouses, sometimes in private security. Over the past year, he had not maintained a steady job. After divorcing Tanya, he briefly lived with relatives before moving out. Friends of Tanya mentioned that communication between her and Jared had ceased following numerous arguments, controlling behavior, and emotional strain. She felt he was a threat to her safety. After their breakup, Jared became difficult to track down. No one knew where he was living or who he was with. Until Bailey Sharp came into the picture, phone data showed that Bailey had been visiting Riverside regularly for several weeks before the incident. Surveillance footage from that area showed her with a man who closely resembled Jared. This was later confirmed by location data from both Bailey's and Jared's phones, which indicated they were in the same places at the same times. On the night Justin went missing, both phones registered signals from the same area in Riverside where Justin's body was eventually found. Police obtained a warrant to search an apartment believed to be occupied by Jared. Based on his mobile activity, the lease was under a false name. Inside, the place was disorganized, containing leftover food, Bailey's clothing, a backpack, and a knife wrapped in a t-shirt. The knife tested positive for blood, which forensics later identified as belonging to Justin Hilbert. However, Jared was not found at the scene. Neighbors reported seeing him shortly before the incident, sometimes alone and other times with a woman who looked like Bailey. Afterward, both disappeared. Authorities in Riverside County have issued warrants for both suspects. The search now includes banks, phone companies, and traffic cameras. Investigators returned to a bar in Murrieta where Bailey was frequently seen. A bartender remembered her distinctly. She had been there with a tall, quiet man. At the time, he didn't know the man's name, but when shown a photo of Jared, he recognized him right away. The bartender noted that they appeared to be very cautious. They talk about the impending disappearance of a woman. This indicated that the initial target might have been Tanya. Justin's presence became the catalyst for the conflict. Jared, using Bailey, set up a scheme where she sent Tanya false messages suggesting infidelity. This was intended to sow doubt, incite conflict, and potentially push Justin away. On the evening of June 20th, Justin left his home after receiving text from Bailey, who claimed she wanted to meet and reveal information about the situation. Unbeknownst to Justin, he was heading into a trap. A few days later, investigators found Justin's abandoned car on a secluded road, far from any houses or security cameras. Inside the vehicle, there were bloodstains on the seat, and outside, a partial fingerprint belonging to Danny Serrano, a man with a criminal record for assault and theft. At that time, Danny was in custody for another charge, but it was confirmed that he was free when Justin went missing. Investigators interviewed Danny at the detention center. Although he denied being involved in the incident, his statements were inconsistent. The police had his photo and showed it to the bartender, who recognized Danny immediately. He remembered seeing Danny with another man who seemed nervous and agitated. Though Danny hadn't been drinking much, he changed clothes in the restroom and threw something in the trash as he left. His testimony supported investigators' suspicions that a third person was involved. Justin's phone was later found in a dumpster near where his car was discovered. Although the phone was damaged, forensic experts managed to retrieve the call logs and text messages. These records indicated that, in the hours leading up to his death, Justin received texts from Bailey's number, followed by a phone call that prompted him to leave his home. In early July, investigators took an interest in a small motel in Arizona where a man and woman matching the descriptions of Jared and Bailey had stayed. The motel manager remembered them as quiet guests who paid in cash and requested not to be disturbed. After their stay, The motel's shower had been thoroughly cleaned, but traces of blood were found in the drain. On July 23, 2016, near an abandoned hangar in the desert, the body of a woman was discovered. It was Bailey Sharp. She had died from multiple stab wounds, and no personal items, identification, or phone were found with her. Additionally, Jared's fingerprints were found on a plastic bag near the dump site where Bailey's body had been hidden. The police became increasingly convinced that Jared had removed a potential witness, making him the primary suspect in both cases. On July 27th, a diner in Arizona reported seeing a man resembling Jared who dined alone and paid with cash. Surveillance footage confirmed it was Jared. Then, on July 30th, in New Mexico, a patrol unit stopped a car with a broken taillight. The driver appeared nervous and possessed fake identification. Fingerprint analysis revealed that it was Jared Bischoff. He was arrested. The authorities found cash, forged documents, and a backpack with clothing in his possession. During questioning, he remained calm and chose not to speak, but the evidence against him was strong. Blood traces matching Bailey's were discovered in a motel, and a knife was found in the apartment. Forensic experts affirmed that the blood on the knife matched blood found in Justin's car, the scene of the crime. Additionally, Jared's DNA was detected on the steering wheel and driver's seat of the car, indicating he had driven it after the incident. Danny Serrano's confession during a second interview ultimately resolved the case. Worried about receiving a life sentence, he decided to cooperate with authorities. He disclosed that Jared was the one who used the knife and fired the fatal shot. Danny also admitted to helping restrain Justin and participating in disposing of the body. His account was consistent with both digital evidence and physical findings. Investigators gathered substantial digital evidence, including geolocation data, message history, and patterns of communication. Forensic linguists analyzed messages sent to Tanya from Bailey's phone number and determined they were actually written by a man. This confirmed prior findings. Jared and Bailey had worked together, with Jared being the mastermind and the one who directly committed the crime. In the spring of 2017, a trial started for Jared Bischoff. He was indicted on charges of first-degree murder in connection with the death of Justin Hilbert and Bailey Sharp, conspiracy, and evidence destruction. The jury found him guilty on all charges, and he received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. His lawyer chose not to appeal the verdict based on the evidence presented. Additionally, Danny Serrano was charged by the district attorney's office with aiding and abetting in a first-degree crime and obstruction of justice. His trial occurred in the fall of 2017, and he was also found guilty by the jury. During sentencing, the court took into account his substance abuse issues and his lesser role in the crime, resulting in a 25-year sentence without the possibility of parole for the first 20 years. One of Jared's former military colleagues revealed that, before the crime took place, Jared often expressed intense resentment towards Tanya. He believed she had destroyed his life, taken everything from him. He saw her as something he owned, and her new partner as a challenge to his authority. What happened to Justin wasn't merely revenge. It was Jared's attempt to emotionally damage Tanya. At first, Jared intended to go after both Justin and Tanya. However, Danny reported that he changed his plan. Jared supposedly said that causing physical death would be too easy and that true suffering would come from leaving someone alive. He thought that if she survived, she would endure ongoing pain for the rest of her life. Jared believed Tanya's greatest suffering would come from losing the person she loved, experiencing fear and isolation, and having to face her son every day. For this reason, Justin became the target.